You're looking live at election night in America. Triumph for some, desolation for others, and lessons, frankly, for everyone.
That's right, Laura. That election night map tells us quite a lot about what you at home are feeling, about the direction of the country, about abortion, about which party gets your vote on policy. But there are also some new polls that, at the same time, hammer home the deep, deep alienation with the current president of the United States. You're watching CNN's special live coverage, Election Night in America. I'm Abby Phillip in Washington.
And I'm Laura Coates here in New York. I mean, Abby, if you're a Democratic consultant, this should be a good night. CNN projects that Kentucky's Democratic governor is going to win against a rising Republican star in a state Donald Trump carried by 26 points. Now, voters in red Ohio prove abortion is still a very powerful motivator. Tonight, CNN projects they said yes to enshrining abortion access in their Constitution. And yet, new CNN poll numbers confirm just how high a hurdle President Biden faces with voters heading into 2024. We're talking about young voters, independents, black voters, Latino voters. That's really the core of the Biden coalition. And 1 year out from the presidential contest, it looks very, very unstable. Let's get right to John Berman at the Magic Wall. John, what a night. Walk us through already the big headline out of Kentucky and what we're still waiting to hear for in Mississippi.
You got it. So in Kentucky, CNN has projected that the incumbent Democratic governor, Andy Beshear, will win re-election. And he has overperformed Joe Biden everywhere in this state. Remember, Joe Biden won only 2 counties for president in 2020. He won here in Jefferson County, where Louisville is, and he won where Lexington is, right there, Fayette County. Andy Beshear, he swept many more counties than Joe Biden did. It overperformed Biden everywhere and overperformed his own performance from 4 years ago, practically everywhere as well. All these states that are colored in, red and blue, Andy Beshear is doing better than he did 4 years ago. So you can see in Democratic counties like Jefferson County, where Louisville is, Andy Beshear got 70% of the vote this time. 4 years ago, he got 67%. So he stretched that. But he also was able to do that in other counties as well. If you look here in Daviess County, where Owensboro is, Andy Beshear won that county with 51% of the vote we're projecting right now. 4 years ago, it was actually a Republican county. So you can see Andy Beshear able to really extend his lead. And one other thing I want to point out, because we're going to be looking at this all night long and frankly all year long, suburban counties, which could be a battleground. There aren't tons in Kentucky, but there are some. And you can see here that, actually, let me put it on, make sure we're looking at this election in 2023. You can see that Andy Beshear won most of the suburban counties here, including flipping this one from 4 years ago. So a good night for the Democrats in Kentucky, a good night in places where they wanted to do well. Let's look at Mississippi right now, where we have not currently projected a winner. The incumbent Republican Tate Reeves is leading by 10 points right now with 71% in. The reason we have not projected this race is because of Hines County right here, the most populous county in the state. Is where Jackson is. You can see just 13% of the vote in right now. So a lot of vote left to be counted there. How much vote? It's hard to say. 4 years ago, if you look at Hines County, you can see the Democrat 4 years ago won by 40,000 votes, but there were just 70,000 votes total in that county. If you look right now at Mississippi, you can see Tate Reeves is leading by 65,000 votes. So would there be enough votes in Hines County alone to make the difference? Probably not, but we want to wait and see. We want to count those votes. There are also some counties where there's almost no vote in. Oh, actually, the vote just did come in here. Washington County, we were looking at, there was none of this before. Okay. This all just came in right now, and you can see Brandon Presley there. The Democrat, who is, by the way, second cousins with Elvis Presley, he is leading in that county by some 4,000 votes. Let me look at Tupelo, Mississippi, the birthplace of Elvis Presley, Lee County. Brandon Presley is actually trailing in the birthplace of his second cousin, Elvis Presley, Laura.
With all the hype in the movies, too, that's surprising for a lot of reasons. But it's so helpful to think about what happened then and now. But what about Virginia? What's happening? That's a very big barometer.
So Virginia, we have a different type of data coming in. I can't show you county by county breakdowns, but I can tell you where Democrats and Republicans are leading. Both chambers in the Assembly are up. Every seat is up. In the Senate, right now, Democrats are leading in 21 of the Senate seats. They would need 21 to control, so they are in position, if things hold, to control the Senate. They are currently in control of the state Senate in Virginia, so this would be a hold for them there. We can look at the House of Delegates now as well. The House of Delegates, if I pull that up right there, you see that Democrats are leading. This number is actually a little outdated. I understand now Democrats are leading in 53 of the House of Delegates races. They would need 51 to control. If this holds, this would be a flip, Laura, and Democrats would then control both chambers of the Virginia Assembly, and this would be a setback for the incumbent Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, who wanted what they're calling the trifecta. He wanted to control the governor's mansion and have Republicans control both chambers. If things stand right now, he would control the mansion, but neither chamber in the Assembly.
The trifecta, some say he wants the presidency. It's a very crucial moment to be able to flip the entire legislative branch in Virginia for other reasons. But I want to go back. It's already in real time right now. Go back to Hines County. It's tightening up there already.
All right, let's look back at Hines County. You have information for me here. Hines County right here. That is where Jackson is. 34% of the vote in. All right, it's not tightening. He's actually widening the lead in Hines County. With 34% in, you can see Brandon Presley has 87% of the vote. He's got a 20,000 vote lead there. That is a big lead, and it's bigger, I think, than the Democrat had 4 years ago. So he's overperforming the Democrat from 4 years ago. He needs to probably do even better than that. So right now, a wide lead in Hines County, which is bringing him closer to Tate Reeves, is still at 53%. One thing I do want to point out, there is a new law in Mississippi that if neither of the candidates gets above 50% plus one, there will be a runoff. So as you're watching the vote come in from Hines County, and there's still a lot of vote to come in from there, maybe that's what everyone should be watching for, if it's enough to drive Tate Reeves below 50% statewide.
We'll keep watching what's going on here. Take me to Ohio right now, because the abortion issue really prominent.
All right, Ohio, there was a ballot initiative to enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. CNN has projected that will win. Abortion rights have won in Ohio, which I will remind people, in the vote for president in 2020, Donald Trump won by about 8%. Right now, if you're looking at the abortion initiative, abortion rights is leading by about 11%. And I can show you the counties that Trump won in Ohio right now. Every county that has a color here, green or orange, is a county that Trump won. So you can see all the green counties here where abortion rights is leading, Trump actually won. So you could think of that, if you're a Democrat, an abortion rights supporting Democrat, you could think of that as a flip. Abortion rights flipped in every county here that's green. That's an interesting way to look at it. One other way to look at this is in, again, suburban counties. This is something that we're going to be talking about for a long time here. These are the counties we consider suburban counties. You can see green, abortion rights, leading in most of the suburban counties here. And if I just circle these areas here to show you again roughly where these suburban counties are, and I remind you where Donald Trump won 4 years ago, you can see, yes, there are a few blue counties, but a lot of red. A lot of red suburban counties flipped, in essence, to abortion rights. And so Democrats looking at this think, hey, you know what? Abortion rights, this could be a potent issue, a potent enough issue to turn some counties that have been voting Republican.
A really important point, and we'll talk to our strategists and also a lot of people talking about what will happen based on these figures in other states. John, stand by. We'll come back to you a lot throughout the night. Abby?
Laura, so much there in those maps. I want to bring it into the studio here with my panel. Ested Herndon, start with you. The state of Kentucky, this is going to become sort of like the golden boy halo on Andy Beshear, that very popular Democratic governor winning in a ruby red state, a second term. Is this potentially a roadmap for any other Democrat who is not named Bashir, which is a pretty famous last name in that state.
I mean, it's important to note the local factors that really matter there. Of course, he has that kind of local brand in the state, but I do think it provides somewhat of a roadmap for Democrats that they're going to take if you're candidates who are not Joe Biden, try to refocus these issues on protecting abortion rights, on focusing on kind of Republican attempts to pull the abortion issue kind of out of where public opinion is. And you have seen Democrats really hammer home on that message, and it played really to Bashir's strengths. And so I think that becomes somewhat of a model here for kind of Democrats to play off nationally. But what we really see, I think, across the board is a split between the health of maybe the Democratic Party broadly and what Joe Biden can do kind of himself if we're looking ahead to 2024. And so I think that there are signs for Democrats down ballot that shows that their voters are still really engaged, that they really understand the stakes of the election, that things like abortion are really still driving voters in a way that really gives them signs. But there's also really clear evidence, I think, that we have coming from CNN's polling, Times polling, others every week, that may not translate individually to Joe Biden because he has the unique issue of his age.
So who wants to help me make sense of this? Joe Biden in this polling, it's really dismal. Some numbers that are, if you're a Democrat, black voters, young voters, that would be really scary if this were November 2024. But at the same time, Democrats are having a good night. They're having a good night in Ohio. They're having a good night in Kentucky, and they're having a good night potentially in Virginia. How does this make sense?
Well, I think that part of this is that I think the American electorate has not yet come to terms with the fact that there's a likely chance that we are going to have a Joe Biden versus Donald Trump election again. I think that you've seen the numbers when it's Joe Biden versus a generic Democrat, who would obviously be perfect and wonderful, or when it's Donald Trump versus a generic Republican. But that's not what we're going to get. I think that you're seeing again and again that the American people want someone else. They're just not likely to get it. You're also seeing that Republicans, once again, have decided that abortion is going to be an issue they can win on. We heard from the Youngkin team saying that 15 weeks is something everyone can agree on. They kept talking about how rational and a very centrist approach to take. And I think that Americans who have been around for longer than 10 seconds are aware that when they say 15 weeks, they don't mean it. We have heard again and again and again and again that Republicans want to limit abortion rights. And Americans were listening to that and said no. They said no in Ohio, they said no in Virginia, and they said no in Kentucky. And let's also keep in mind that Ohio just legalized recreational marijuana. Like, these are issues that I think attract young people. They attract people who are not traditional Democratic voters. But I think it's important to separate those issues from the fact that many Americans are saying, I don't want to have another Trump-Biden election.
I mean, what does this mean for Joe Biden in your view?
Yeah, I mean, if you take a look at some other polls that have come out showing this hypothetical generic Republican or generic Democrat against either Trump or Biden, you see exactly the dynamic that Jane described. And you see really big swings, particularly with groups like young voters. The New York Times Siena poll that came out over the weekend showed that Joe Biden against Donald Trump was like running close to even with young voters. And as someone who studied young voters for a long time, I was like, hang on, everybody. Young voters are not Republican.
But the CNN poll had very similar results.
Right. And then when you look at it against Joe Biden against Donald Trump against generic Democrats, suddenly the numbers snap back into place. It is not that young people have all swung to the right. It is that they uniquely look at Joe Biden and go, this can't possibly be the guy we're going to vote for, right? And so I think Democrats have some really hard choices to make in the coming weeks ahead.
I was just talking, Mark Preston, to Chris Christie in the last hour, and he was very eager to say, when you look at the Kentucky race, Daniel Cameron, who was endorsed by Donald Trump, who hugged Donald Trump, who coddled some of the election lies, even all of that, he lost. And Trump was just saying that his endorsement, just a couple days ago, his endorsement was going to be the surge that pushed Cameron over the top, and that did not happen.
Well, remember when Donald Trump, after the election, talked about how great his percentage was on his endorsements, but then if you looked at the endorsements, many of those people that were running didn't even have challengers, right? So he inflated his numbers. I think when you look in Kentucky, I think Daniel Cameron had to endorse Donald Trump. Even if you look at the CNN poll right now, Donald Trump has a 76% approval rating nationally. That's with every one of these court cases going on against him. That's with all the video footage we have of January 6th right now. Donald Trump is a force in the Republican Party that we have never seen, certainly in our lifetime. The question is, though, for Chris Christie, who I think, 10 years ago, Chris Christie is like the atypical Republican candidate that you want out on the stump. 10 years later, you look at these numbers, you look at the CNN poll, Chris Christie's approval rating amongst Republicans is over 50%. Now, I don't think that's fair to Chris Christie, but I think it does go to show you where the Republican Party is right now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Andy Beshear outperformed Joe Biden, but he also outperformed Andy Beshear, really blowing his last performance out of the water, which shows growth even among probably some Trump voters in the state of Kentucky, which should be something of a wake-up call for Republicans. Everyone, stick around. Laura, you've got a lot more to discuss over there.
We really do, Abby, because this is a huge night in America. I want to bring in my panel of CNN political commentators. We've got Ashley Allison, we have Al Stewart, we have Jeff Duncan, and Jamal Simmons, all experts in their own right. I want to really lean into what's going on in Ohio, though, because we know normally in any election, Roe v. Wade is almost always on the ballot. With the Dobbs decision, no more, and yet abortion is still on the ballot. You're from Ohio. I want to start with you, Miss Ohioan, and ask you, what do you make of this? Are you surprised that they are coming out this way?
I'm not. And one of the reasons why I think Ohio continues to trend more and more red is because the investment in the Democratic Party has continued to decrease and decrease after Obama won in 2012. Ohio is a very diverse state. It has Appalachia. It has the steel mills of Toledo and Youngstown, Ohio, where I'm from. It has Cincinnati, where the airport is actually in Kentucky. And then it has Columbus, which is a booming metropolitan area with Ohio State, the second largest university in the country. So when you have a state like that, the diversity allows for a complexity of way the voter shows up. In August, there was a tell that in a special election, in August of all years of 2023, Ohio voters still showed up and said, we don't want you to change the way you get a constitutional amendment in the state. And because of that, then they showed up again and said, and now we want to enshrine abortion into our Constitution. And so, again, I think it's a tell that Republicans are a bit out of touch with this issue, and it will be a forecast on how Sherrod Brown can actually win next year in the Senate race. Joe Biden probably won't win Ohio, but can Sherrod Brown hold his Senate seat in 2024?
That's a good point.
There's no doubt that Republicans are misfiring on abortion, right? And when you lose a state, a ballot issue like this in a state like Ohio and others, then obviously something's misfiring. I think the fundamental flaw that Republicans have taken into this conversation around abortion is it's become a primary issue. Mm-hmm. And so everybody tries to outright each other in a primary process. I watched it play out in Georgia in the illustrious Herschel Walker Senate debacle, to be nice. I watched a stage full of candidates, Republican candidates, just go one after another, saying that they didn't believe in any exceptions. I can't imagine that makes any sense in any shape or any corner of the country to stand up there and say that you don't believe in any exceptions, even if you're in a pro-life stance. I think the conversation has got to shift, and it's going to take a long time to do this. But look, almost every American is pro-life and pro-choice. It's just about where on the calendar does that come in. And we need to shape that argument in a way that's empathetic and compassionate, not bombastic and demonizing the other side on this.
Some said Roe v. Wade did that with the test, but that obviously is gone. But what do you think?
Well, when you have a state like Ohio, very red state, coming forth with this position on the abortion issue, it should be a wake-up call, excuse me, to the pro-life community. It's, 55% for restoring the abortion provisions in the state constitution to 44. That's a real wake-up call to the pro-life community. And I think moving forward, having been someone that has fought really hard for many years to overturn Roe v. Wade, the issue was to put this back in the hands of the states. It's been back in the hands of the states on ballot initiative after ballot initiative since Roe v. Wade was overturned. Every single time, voters in the states voted to protect abortion rights. So as the pro-life community needs to look at this, to Jeff's point, let's reshape the conversation. This needs to be more about limits on abortion. Where do we agree on? Let's make sure we have protections for rape, incest, and life of the mother, and look at reasonable limits on abortion. 15 weeks, I think most people would agree is reasonable, and have the conversation from there, because I can guarantee you, as I'm sure Ashley will agree, Democrats will use this as an issue in the 2024 election. More states will probably put this on the ballot because it certainly turns out voters. But Republicans need to shift the conversation more to limits as opposed to an outright ban.
Governor Youngkin thinks that way, but I ask you, Jamal, because when you're talking, it feels a little bit like moving the goalpost. You say you want the people to decide in a state. Well, if time after time they've made the decision, and then you say, well, actually, I guess I'm not framing this correctly for you. Does it undermine the voters' intelligence, and are they onto it?
I think the voters have just decided, whatever the issue is, they're not really for taking away a woman's right to make the choices about her own body when it comes to her reproductive choices. You know, I remember last year when I was at the White House last year, and I remember everyone thought that election was going to be about the economy. There was a New York Times poll on October 17th. I know we were all talking about a Times poll from the other day, October 17th, that said the economy was the most important issue, it was going to be more important than abortion, and Republicans were headed to a big victory. It's not what happened. Right? And I think the same thing we're seeing now. Ever since we had those pink pussycat hat marches right after Donald Trump won his election, we have seen the women of America stand up again and again and again when it's time to talk about MAGA and say no thank you. I was watching one race in Virginia, particularly Russet Perry, who is a state senator running for state senate in Virginia, District 31. That race was all about crime. She was being tagged as a soft on crime, and then she was tagging her opponent about being an abortion extremist. She's won that race with 53% of the vote about, right? We are seeing this again and again. The last thing I'll say on this, I was talking to a pollster friend earlier today. He said when it comes to young voters, which Democrats are very concerned about right now, when it comes to young voters, it's Donald Trump and abortion are the 1-2 punch. Right? When young voters realize Donald Trump is the one who's on the ballot, and then they think about the Supreme Court and what it did with abortion, it moves young voters back to the camp of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I think that we all need to simmer down a little bit and let this election play out.
I feel like that was loaded. I think there might be a poll you're referencing about simmering down. Something tells me there was something recently that happened that made the Biden camp a little bit nervous. We're still waiting on results in Mississippi and also Virginia on this election night in America. We'll be back in just a moment.
We are still waiting for results in Virginia and in Mississippi, and we've just gotten an update there. Let's go straight to John Berman at the Magic Wall. John, what's happening right now?
Yeah, still counting votes in Mississippi, Abby. You can see the Republican Tate Reeves, the incumbent, is leading by about 8% right now, about 56,000 votes. But there is still a giant county outstanding. Hines County, the most populous county in the state, you can see has just 34% reporting. And in this county, it is the most Democratic county in the state as well. You can see Brandon Presley, the Democrat, is leading by 20,000 votes, nearly 75%. So there's a lot more vote to come in there. How much vote? It's a little hard to tell what the ultimate total will be. But if you look at 4 years ago in Hines County, the Democrat won there with 77% of the vote. There were about 70,000 votes total in that county. So project that out again to now 70,000 votes. Can they expect 40,000 or more votes there? Unclear, but it might be enough to narrow this lead that Tate Reeves has even more. And in Mississippi, if neither candidate gets above 50% of the vote, 50% plus one, there will be a runoff. So that's something we're watching very closely now as these votes come in. And there are still a few other counties that'll go down to 75%. Everything you see here colored in is a county that's got less than 75% of the vote in. Hines County, the most populous, but there are a lot of other blue counties there as well. So still counting, Abby.
Yeah, it's still counting, but just to underscore, the question here is whether one of these candidates will get above 50%. Otherwise, we could still be looking at a runoff in this race. John Berman, stand by for us. We are still, as you can see here, counting these votes. We have much more to come as we watch these results come in from Virginia, also from Mississippi. More of CNN's special live coverage coming up next.
Welcome back to CNN special live coverage. Right now, a major projection. CNN projects that Democrats will hold on to their majority in the Virginia State Senate. The House remains undecided, but Democrats are currently ahead there, but we are still not ready to make a projection there. Let's go back to John Berman to break it all down. John, walk us through these numbers.
Yeah, let's take a look at this right now. At this moment, There are 21 Democrats leading in Senate races in Virginia. CNN projects that they will control the state Senate. That's a hold for them. They currently control the Senate, but this is significant because the incumbent Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, he's laid a lot on the line. He's gone all in to try to get control of both chambers, the Senate and the House of Delegates, to give him the trifecta. So we could have the governor's mansion, the Senate, and the House of Delegates. He's not going to get there. CNN projects that Democrats will control the Senate. And if you look at the House of Delegates right now, where things stand, Democrats are leading there as well. So it's possible this night could get even worse for Glenn Youngkin. One of the issues that Democrats have tried to lean into in this election, abortion rights, something that we saw in Ohio, we saw in Kentucky. We're seeing it at play here in Virginia as well. Democrats will likely credit their mentioning and campaigning on abortion rights as something that helped them maintain now control of the state Senate and has them leading in the House of Delegates and dealing a setback to a popular Republican governor. Laura?
John Berman, so important. Remember, this was a governor who only has one term, and he wanted to have a lot under his belt. Maybe he wants to run for the presidency in the future. Abby?
Laura, we've got the perfect person potentially to talk to about all of those developments. Joining me now is the former Republican governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Bob McDonnell. Governor, thanks for joining us. Sure. Hi there. So look, a very significant, consequential day for your state and for your governor. Glenn Youngkin really put it all on the line here, saying to voters, give me full control of this government and I can give you a conservative agenda. Did voters tonight reject that agenda?
Well, looks like the Republicans are going to pick up one seat in the Senate, but not enough to take the majority. So the Democrats will control there. And I think it's too close to call right now in the House from everything that I've seen. But, a couple of things, Abby, really, I guess, surprised me. Glenn Youngkin did a terrific job getting Republicans to believe in early voting. And so the ballot numbers early on for the Republicans were terrific. But the margin on Election Day seemed to be about, even, which it wasn't. Republicans had won Election Day in these past couple of years. But the second thing is, Youngkin's a popular governor. President Biden is way underwater in Virginia, and on things like crime and major investments in education and taxes, where there were major tax cuts for the people, all of which were popular initiatives. It's surprising that Glenn Youngkin's efforts and his popularity didn't carry more weight today. And I think the obvious issue was abortion in the wake of the Dobbs decisions going back now to the states under the Federalist principles. It looks like that issue was turned out to be a winning issue for the Democratic Party. Their messaging of calling it a ban after 15 weeks or even before is the way they message it, even though the Republicans had indicated Democrats had no limits up to birth. It seemed like the messaging went in favor of the Democratic Party, and for suburban women, that's where the Republicans lost today.
Was that a mistake for Youngkin to make this election cycle in Virginia about a 15-week abortion ban, given what we now are seeing in all of these different states? A lot of American voters, when this is put to them, they reject that. Was it a mistake for him to do that?
See, I don't think he really made it about that. He made the Republican position pretty clear early on that this was about a 15-week limit, and after that, exceptions for rape, incest, life in the mother, but said that, look, we believe in parental notification, parental consent, informed consent, a ban on partial birth abortion, all of which are very much supported by 70% plus of Virginians. And so the argument was that the Democrats were the ones that were radical with favoring abortion up until the moment of birth, which they admitted in several of the legislation. So I'm surprised that contrast, Abby, didn't carry the day with suburban women, because that's more in tune with where they say that they actually where they actually are. And so focusing on crime and education and tax cuts and so forth as a contrast to the Democratic position, I thought would win. I look at my election 2009, my opponent spent most of his time talking about my position on abortion. And I said, yeah, I'm pro-life, but look, I'm going to fix your roads. I'm going to improve your schools. I'm going to carry the day on some of the kitchen table issues. And that won by 18 points. So I'm surprised. We're so purple now in Northern Virginia that we didn't win.
Look, just real quick, I mean, does this complicate Glenn Youngkin's argument, potentially, that if he wants to have a national platform, that he couldn't sell this message even in his home state, a purple state like Virginia?
I think that's too early to say that. He's still a very popular governor, high 50s in a purple state. I think that says a lot about his ability to lead. We're going to end up with not having a Republican majority, which is what he sought after. But the ultimate change in both houses is going to be essentially nominal, one or two votes. But I think that, with his popularity and Biden's unpopularity, I just thought we'd have a different outcome.
Yeah, it is very interesting. Interesting also that this is coming as a surprise to you too, Governor Bob McDonnell. Thank you for joining us. Good timing to have you on tonight. And we are still awaiting some important results to come in tonight from Virginia. Still waiting to find out about the House of Delegates there, and also from the state of Mississippi. And how worried should the president's campaign be about these new and troubling CNN poll numbers? We'll have much more on CNN special live coverage just ahead.
You're watching CNN special live coverage. It is election night in America, and CNN is projecting the Democrats will maintain control of the Virginia State Senate. Right now, they lead the House of Delegates as well, but CNN is not yet ready to make a projection. CNN's data guru, Harry Enten, is here at the Magic Wall. Harry, talk to me about what history tells us about what impact the Virginia race could actually have next year.
I think the question is, why the heck should anyone outside the state of Virginia care about the results that we're seeing tonight, right? We keep concentrating on these individual states. Let me give you a reason why perhaps they should care. And that is that the outcome of the Virginia Senate is actually a pretty good bellwether of what happens in the next year's presidential race. So if you look at 2019, for example, Democrats won there, Joe Biden won here. In 2020, 2015, the GOP won, then Donald Trump won. 2011 was a tie, Obama won, but then go back to 2008, the Democrats won. 2000, you can see that, 2008 Obama won, 2007 the Democrats won. So the fact is, in 3 of the last 4 election cycles, who wins the Virginia Senate has told us who's going to win the next year's presidential race. And that, to me, is a reason why, even if you don't live in the state of Virginia and you don't even care about those state politics, you could actually care if you care about national politics, because there's a telltale sign.
Well, there's also Kentucky, though. I heard that was a bellwether. Are they one and the same?
Yes. In fact, Kentucky is actually a better bellwether. 4 for 4. Democrats win in 2019. Biden wins in 2020. 2016, Trump won. A year before the GOP won. 2011, it was Andy Beshear's father, Steve Beshear, who won in 2011 and 2007. Forecasted Obama wins in both 2012 and 2008. And I think this ultimately comes down to the question I think a lot of us are going to be asking over the next 24 to 48 hours. The polls are saying one thing. The results, when people are actually voting, are saying something entirely different. And based upon recent history, hey, Democrats really have to like what happened in Kentucky, and they really have to like as well what happened in Virginia, because the next year, if history holds, right, maybe Joe Biden is in fact going to win re-election, even though the polls perhaps at this point aren't too favorable for him.
The real question is what happens if Virginia and Kentucky are at odds, and then which one is going to be the true bellwether. I guess the one that has the Derby is one that will win in the end. Harry Enten, stand by. Look, the numbers, as he indicated, they're pretty bleak for President Biden. It is not looking good, frankly, across the board. The strategy for the White House going forward, we'll talk about next.
We have some breaking news. We are getting word now that the Democratic challenger to the Republican in Mississippi, the incumbent, has just called to concede. John Berman, what can you tell us about that?
All right. Right now, you can see that the incumbent Republican governor, Tate Reeves, leads by about 49,000 votes, by about 6%. 82% of the vote is in right now. CNN still hasn't projected a leader, but you're reporting now that Brandon Presley, the Democrat, has called to concede. One of the reasons we have not projected a winner yet is because Hines County, which is the most populous county in the state, home to Jackson, Mississippi, has only about 59% reporting. And you can see Brandon Presley has a huge lead there. He's leading by 30,000 votes. So he could pick up a chunk more votes there, a lot more votes in Hines County. But Brandon Presley apparently doesn't believe it will be enough to close the margin. What's interesting is in Mississippi, if you do not get above 50%, if neither candidate gets above 50%, there would be a runoff in the state. And apparently, again, Brandon Presley might be doing the math in his head, thinking that even though Hines County only has 59%, even if he does pick up several thousand more votes there and close that margin, it would not be enough to get Tate Reeves below 50%. So perhaps that what is fueling that call that you're reporting on right now, Abby.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these candidates are doing more than just math in their head. They're looking at their own data. They're looking at their precinct data and seeing things that we may not have yet based on the official data, but that's why you might see a concession call before this is officially called by news organizations like CNN. We were just showing you just moments ago both Brandon Presley and Tate Reeves at the podiums at their respective campaign events tonight. A big race that was pretty closely watched by a lot of people, in part because this is a state, Mississippi, where you have an incumbent governor in Tate Reeves who was embroiled in a huge scandal. It looked like an opportunity potentially for Democrats to pick up that seat in a state that has the largest non-white population of any state in the South. It could be a particularly interesting moment, but it was not to be for Democrats. John Berman, stand by for us. We'll continue to come back to you as we continue to wait on those results. I want to bring in our panel now. Mark Preston, this is a little bit of a different narrative from what we've been seeing tonight, but not a huge surprise. I mean, Mississippi is a deep red state. It would be a highly unusual thing if a Democrat were to win there. But in the context of all the other moves that we've seen tonight by voters, this is a disappointment for Democrats.
A disappointment for Democrats, but I would say in some ways a win for Democrats because you saw energy and focus on a state the Democratic Party really hasn't paid a whole lot of attention towards. I remember being down there, Abby, back in, I guess it was 2019, and talking to the Democratic Party chairman at the time, had no money, was basically on his own. He was a local lawyer, just trying to hold things together. And look, there are more Republicans registered to vote in Mississippi. But again, if you're a Democratic Party that's at least talking about Mississippi, it means that you're doing, well elsewhere. So again, a loss for Democrats, but it's not like a devastating loss.
Yeah, and look, the results tonight are going to be dissected and bisected by both parties. Kristen Soltis-Anderson, if you're looking at this tonight, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, what do you realistically take away going into 2024?
So if you're a Democrat, what you're taking away is we're going to run on the issue of abortion, because even with all of these headwinds, even with Joe Biden not being very popular, even with voters preferring Republicans on the economy, and even with voters telling pollsters like me that the economy is their #1 issue, it seems as though an issue like abortion is enough of a driver and a turnout machine for Democrats that they should lean into it. For Republicans, the message needs to be when you don't invest in these races, when you don't pay attention to these races, this is kind of what happens, #1. And #2, Donald Trump is not the turnout machine kingmaker that you might think he is. Even in a state like Kentucky, that Donald Trump won by a large margin, he comes in, he endorses Daniel Cameron. He's my guy. This guy's not a Mitch McConnell Republican. Well, maybe Mitch McConnell Republicans actually do quite well in Kentucky.
It's Donald Trump's not the kingmaker, but neither is Glenn Youngkin, apparently.
Yeah, I think we're seeing in multiple races, we're seeing that Glenn Youngkin's efforts to attempt to achieve the trifecta, to prove that he can be, in performance only, a reasonable Republican. Let's keep in mind that he's just wearing a vest. That's all that's happening here. But he seems to have not achieved his goals. He's not getting the trifecta. He might lose the House of Delegates. We aren't sure yet. But I think that we're seeing that all of the talk about him potentially jumping to the presidential race, all of that should stop now.
Well, we'll see about that. We'll see about that. A lot more to come this election night in America. Democrats are celebrating some big wins in both Kentucky and in Ohio, and we're watching the results out of Virginia. More from CNN's special live coverage next. tonight, voters deliver a verdict and deliver two important wins for Democrats in cherry red states. I'm Abby Phillip in Washington.
And I'm Laura Coates in New York, and you're watching CNN's special live coverage, Election Night in America. And CNN's projecting two very big and very consequential bulletin board wins for Democrats. Tonight in Kentucky, projecting that Democrats will retain the governor's mansion. Andy Beshear defeating rising Republican star Daniel Cameron. Also tonight in Ohio, CNN projects the right to an abortion will now be written into that state's constitution. It's evidence that abortion and the issue of abortion has staying power more than a year after the Supreme Court erased Roe versus Wade.
And we're also waiting on some important results out of Virginia. Let's get right to John Berman at the Magic Wall for us. John, this is really, really important right now. We just called the Senate in Virginia. We're waiting for the House of Delegates. What are you seeing there as Democrats and Republicans battle it out district by district for control over that legislature?
Yeah, let's look at Virginia right now. We don't have the same type of granular data coming in, but what we can tell you right now is we look at the Senate. CNN has projected that Democrats will maintain control of the Senate. They'll have at least 21 seats there, which will give them a majority. That, in and of itself, is a setback for the Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, who ran hard in this campaign. He wanted to have a Republican Senate and a Republican House of Delegates, what they call a trifecta, so he can control the entire state government apparatus. He has lost in that endeavor. That has failed, and he put a lot on the line there. And the night could get worse for him because not only have Democrats maintained control in the state Senate, but if you look at the House of Delegates right now in Virginia, right now, they are currently leading in 51 of these races. We just got an update, and the Democrats are leading in 51 of these races, but 51 is still enough to control the House of Delegates as well. And if that holds, that would actually be a flip. That would mean it went from Republican to Democrat in the face of these efforts from the Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, to get the trifecta in one of the major issues in Virginia, and we've seen this in several states tonight, Abby, abortion rights. Glenn Youngkin wanted to limit them. Democrats said no. They ran on providing abortion rights, and that may have been decisive.
Just one of the many big headlines potentially coming out of tonight. There's also Kentucky, a major governor's race there. What is the big headline out of that state?
The big headline out of Kentucky, let me get to it, is that Andy Beshear won and won big, okay? Look at the map here. Look at all the blue counties. He overperformed Joe Biden in Kentucky literally everywhere, in every single county. In 2020, Joe Biden won only 2 counties. This time around, you can see how much more blue there is for Andy Beshear. And he didn't just overperform Joe Biden. I think, as you noted last hour, Abby, he overperformed Andy Beshear from 4 years ago. He improved on his margins of victory. I can show you everywhere where Beshear overperformed, and you can look anywhere there's a color, red or blue. Here, he did better than he did 4 years ago. That is a tremendous improvement. And also, I just want to show you some suburbs here. Suburbs are so important in the election tonight and will be into 2024. And you can see right here, not tons of suburbs in Kentucky. It's a pretty rural state, but in all the counties with a significant suburban population, almost all of them, or at least the vast majority, Andy Beshear did really well. That, too, is something that Democrats would hope that they can replicate in other races around the country.
Yeah, and there in Kentucky, but also in the state of Ohio, abortion, as we were just talking about, a huge issue on the minds of voters. In this case, on the actual ballot, what did voters decide there?
This is something that is really glaring. First of all, you can see abortion rights, which was a yes vote on a constitutional amendment enshrining abortion, at almost 56% of the vote. Just a reminder, in the state of Ohio, which you call cherry red, I like the variation from ruby red. In the state of Ohio, Donald Trump won with 53% of the vote. He won by 8 points. So right now, abortion rights ahead by nearly 11 points. You can see the huge spread there. And I just want to show you that in the counties that Donald Trump won, every county that's colored in here, green and orange, is a county that Donald Trump won. So all the green counties here are counties where abortion rights prevailed in the balloting last night. And you can see these are Trump-won counties now that have voted for abortion rights. Abortion rights can be a potent issue even in a Trump-won county. And you can also look at the suburban counties, which I think is also very interesting. Suburban counties here. This, if you look at this map, everywhere in green here, actually everywhere that's colored here, is a suburban county. But if we circle these, I circled the suburban counties up there in the Northeast, over here, and down here, and then look at Trump again, you can see a lot of these were areas that Trump won. Trump won every red county here in the Ohio suburbs, yet abortion rights was a potent issue, and people voted for abortion rights in those Trump counties. Again, Abby, Democrats will be looking at these results, these suburbs, and they will hope to replicate that. This is the 6th state now where abortion rights has been on the ballot and prevailed.
And a really smart observation by you there, John Berman. A lot of voters in Ohio and in Kentucky, you could probably argue in Virginia too, who would have been Trump voters, probably voted for either a Democrat or Democratic-leaning issues in this off-year cycle. A lot of consultants on both sides of the aisle taking a close look at that. Berman, stand by for us. We'll check back with you in this hour. Laura, there is much more to come from the actual results, but so much to digest with your great panel up there.
Let's unpack it, Abby, because I've got this great panel with me right now. Big picture, this was a heck of a night for Democrats, perhaps maybe unexpected in some areas, but on abortion in particular, is the writing on the wall?
I've been doing this for the last couple of election cycles. I've had the fortunate pleasure of sitting in this seat, and I feel like a play-by-play announcer for a terrible baseball team that just keeps losing and losing and losing and not doing anything about it.
The Republicans, you mean?
Absolutely. And not changing direction, and all things point back to Donald Trump. There's so much chaos throughout the party. We need to reorganize. We need to revalidate. We should not be losing states that we're losing. We should not be losing issues that we're losing. We've just completely lost our way. And until we purge ourselves of Donald Trump, often, I think we're kind of in the process of throwing him up, right? It's going to take time. It's disgusting. It's hard to watch. But until we get rid of Donald Trump, we're going to continue to stumble and bumble and lose races and states and issues that we should win.
It's very visual at midnight. I like that. The acid reflux connotation of all of it. But let me ask you, though, when it comes to abortion, is Donald Trump really to blame? Obviously, he was the one to nominate Supreme Court justices who, on the one hand, said that they would be very objective and adhere to precedent. And then when it came to Roe v. Wade, did ultimately overturn it. Is he really the through line?
He's the motivating factor because, as you said, he's the one that put the justices on the Supreme Court that overturned it and put it back in the hands of the states. Now it's in the hands of the states, and they're saying, we want to protect abortion. And look, that's something that Republicans need to wake up on because Democrats, I'm sure, will make this a ballot issue in 2024, and that's going to be a big motivator in Democrat voters. I'm looking big picture tonight also at not just the power of abortion to motivate voters. I'm looking at the power of incumbency. You look at Kentucky, Governor Beshear, being the incumbent governor, had the good fortune of being able to work on the economy, being able to work on education, being able to work on issues to his state. But also, as the governor, he was there for his people in the tragic mass shooting. He was there for his people during the floods. He was there for his people after tornadoes. That is invaluable. When you do for the people and you're there for them in times of crisis, they will remember that on Election Day and come out for him. And if you heard his speech tonight, his acceptance speech, he was talking about this is not about right or left. This is about moving forward. And that is very powerful because he has been a very good leader for the people of Kentucky. Also, as we're looking at Mississippi, Governor Reeves did a great job has done a great job as the governor, improving education, low unemployment, as well as improving the economy, moving Mississippi, that is generally in the back of the pack, moving him in the right direction. And his voters look at that as he's done a good job so far, and we're going to reward him by reelecting him. So the power of incumbency really is also on display tonight.
Well, there's also the scandal of allegedly moving welfare funds to those who were wealthy instead. And there's that other movement that happened as well, but the voters essentially said no. But hold on, strategist, talk to me here about this, because from what Alice is talking about, it sounds like all one must be is essentially maybe the consoler-in-chief of the executive head of the state. Biden's not doing well in his polls, if that's the reason.
Well, Biden's always been the consoler-in-chief of the country, right? Like, nobody can feel your pain like Joe Biden can. And I think it's ultimately a superpower. I think what we saw in Andy Beshear tonight is the future of the Democratic Party. What we saw is somebody he's the future of the Democratic Party. What we saw is somebody who is willing to stand up and say, at a moment of crisis, not just what's wrong, but kind of give a tear to it, right? I remember when one of the storms happened, he talked about walking up and seeing a bike leaned up against the side of the wall and knowing that a child had lived in that house that was no longer alive, and how he had a child who had a bike just like that. And like, this guy really tagged in. And I think every candidate that's thinking about running for national office needs to pay attention to the speech he gave tonight and how it is he has conducted himself on the national stage. I don't know if he can run for president. He's a little moderate for the current Democratic Party, but he's certainly somebody, whether it's him or Governor Whitmer or Gavin Newsom or Wes Moore, there's a crop of governors, or Shapiro in Pennsylvania, there are a crop of governors out there in the Democratic Party who I think in 2028 are going to make it a big, big year, along with, of course, the vice president coming.
Or maybe sooner.
Well, see, I knew someone was going to go there tonight. It was you. I love it. Let me ask you, okay, talk about somebody who might have his sights, Ashley, gave your last name first, Ashley Allison. When it comes to 2028, Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, it's pretty clear some people wanted him to jump in right now. And it's also pretty clear with a one-term and a term-limited governor in Virginia that he had to have some wins, the ability to say the school choice, the parental choice issues, and now add to that, I was able to get the Republicans in charge. That's not happening for him. Is that a distant dream now?
I don't think it's a distant dream, but here's what I will say. It's interesting to hear both Jamal and Alice talk about Governor Beshear. I'm like, oh, wow, he's governing, which governors are supposed to do. It seems like such a foreign concept in politics these days. And I think for Mississippi, look, it's hard for Dems to win in Mississippi, but what I will say is because of that race, it's a tell. Don't give up on the South, Dems. Like, we have Georgia. This is a place, particularly a state like Mississippi, with such a large Black population. When I zoom out, I think, when Glenn Youngkin won in 2021, everybody was like, oh my God, the Dems are going to throw it away in 2022. I think what voters are actually demanding is that they want people who are going to protect their freedoms. And 2022, in the midterms, abortion was on the ballot, but also voters said no to election deniers because they want to protect our democracy. And 2023, voters said no to extremism on abortion in Ohio, in Virginia, and also in Kentucky. And I think in 2024, the question is going to be, who is going to move us forward? Who is going to is Joe Biden the person who is going to continue to get the country back on track? And if it is up against Donald Trump, I know the polls that came out are not great, and I would not ignore them if I'm the Biden campaign, and I don't think they are. But I would say that you need to make the argument that Donald Trump will take us back to extremism and will compromise our freedoms, and Joe Biden is the person for progress and to keep us on track.
What does he often say? Judge me not against the almighty, but the alternative. Maybe the alternative conversations will have to come more and more. Of course, we're a year out still. Abby, back to you.
Laura, we do have another major projection here. The Democrats have now won full control of the Virginia legislature. They have retained the state Senate, and now CNN can project that they have flipped the House of Delegates. We're going to go back to John Berman over at the Magic Wall. John Berman, this is the scenario, not what the governor, Glenn Youngkin, wanted, but the scenario that seemed, in this political climate, somewhat unlikely. Democrats flipping the House of Delegates in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Yeah, I think if you talk to the Democratic consultant class, this would have been the state in the race that they were watching most closely. Let me just put this up there to reiterate what Abby just said. Right now in Virginia, Democrats lead in 52 of the races for the House of Delegates. We have projected they will flip and gain control of the House of Delegates, and they are maintaining control of the state Senate. As Abby said, this gives Democrats full control over the state assembly in Virginia, both chambers, which is the exact opposite of what the incumbent Republican governor Glenn Youngkin wanted. He campaigned hard in this state and lost in both cases. In the House of Delegates, it's actually even more embarrassing because it's a flip. It went from Republicans to the Democrats. In the Senate, it was a Democratic hold. In this in some ways may derail his national ambitions, at least for a time, Abby. I mean, you heard people whispering, should Glenn Youngkin jump into the presidential race even at this late time? Might be hard for him now based on this. And again, on the issue of abortion rights, which was very much front and center. He put it front and center for a time in this campaign. We see once again that Democrats have prevailed here. And as I said, yes, Kentucky with Andy Beshear, that's a big win for Democrats, but some people might look at that as an anomaly because of his family name, because of how strong he performed as a governor over the last several years. But this race, people watching very closely, Democrats think this could be a sign of what is to come.
John Berman, thank you for that. We'll be back with you shortly. And obviously, this is a blow not just to the governor, Glenn Youngkin. It's also a blow, as said Herndon, to the Republicans who had hoped that coming out of Virginia would be a narrative, that there is an alternative to Trumpism, an alternative. Maybe it's centered around Glenn Youngkin, but maybe it's centered around issues like crime, issues like education, issues like I'm going to put this in quotes because this is the word Glenn Youngkin used, a compromise position on abortion. That turned out to not be the case.
It turned out to not be the case in a big way. I mean, underneath the kind of candidate split on the Republican Party, you've had this kind of agenda fighting between, you know, folks like Senator Rick Scott, obviously Donald Trump at the top of the party, and people like Glenn Youngkin, who have tried to pitch themselves as kind of conservative legislative shapers who could use this Virginia session to really show how that works electorally. And that didn't pan out tonight. I mean, this is someone who's going to be term limited out of that Virginia gubernatorial seat, and he was hoping to have a kind of moment that really showed that this brand of politics worked for these type of voters.
An opportunity to actually get some things done in the next year with a full control.
Absolutely, and so none of those things are coming to fruition. And I think we're seeing a Democratic Party that has learned a kind of muscle memory in the Trump era. They did a better job organizing kind of on a state, local level. They've reversed some of their grassroots problems that we saw during the Obama era. And frankly, all of those groups that popped up in 2016 to 2020 have created a kind of language that's helped them in these special elections and have caused voters to really get more involved in some of these things. I don't think we can overlook how Joe Biden's Democratic Party top down is a more structured party for these type of races than the Barack Obama version of this party. That's the good news. The bad news is that those type of people are different who vote in presidential elections. So they can do well with these type of people this year. The question is the type of person who then comes and votes for the top line of the ticket next year.
Look, we have so much to discuss on all of this. Everyone, just stick around for us. The results are coming in. The picture is becoming more clear. It has been a good night for Democrats, clashing at the same time with a very bad day for the Democratic president. We'll talk about how these things work together. The brand new CNN polling that the White House is now looking at very closely. You're watching CNN's live special coverage. Tonight, critical Democratic wins in Kentucky, Virginia, and Ohio. Voters there breaking in a big way for Democrats, and that is good news for the Democratic Party. But now there is some bad news there if you live or work in the White House. Our brand new CNN polling shows the near record frustration with President Biden as he is asking Americans to renew his contract for a second term. Now, in a hypothetical matchup with Donald Trump, he narrowly leads Joe Biden, 49 to 45%. Let's go back to John Berman over at the Magic Wall to break all of this down. We've been talking about this polling, but really tell us, what is the picture here of how President Biden is faring with the very voters that he actually needs in order to win re-election, particularly with non-white minority voters?
Yeah, not faring well enough. That's the story tonight, Abby. And you can imagine in the White House, they're saying, look at the votes, look at Kentucky. Don't look at the polls because the polls paint a bleak picture for them. As you said, in the head-to-head matchup among registered voters, Trump leads 49 to 45%. But if you look at voter groups, particularly minority voter groups, and I'm going to keep both up on the screen right now so you can see this. Among black voters, Joe Biden leads, but only 73 to 23%. According to Pew, Biden won over 90% of the black vote in 2020. That is a huge change there. Among Latino voters, it's virtually tied. Again, a Democrat to win needs to do much better among Latino voters. And among white voters, you can see Donald Trump with a 12-point lead. So you can see, particularly with black voters, which helped Joe Biden propelled him to the Democratic nomination 4 years ago and then into the White House. His numbers are sagging. And there are some other numbers that should worry the White House, too, in terms of personality or character traits here. I want to put both up on the screen here. This is the trait applies to Joe Biden or the trait applies to Donald Trump. And I'll put both boards up so you can see what voters said. Okay? Respects the rule of law, Biden leads Trump 51-35. Honest and trustworthy, 42-43. Will unite, not divide the country, 39-44. And cares about people like you, 44-40. Now, this, incidentally, Abby, back when I used to cover elections in the dark ages, this used to be everything. If you led among people, cares about people like you, you won. Right now, though, look at these other numbers that seem to be dragging Joe Biden down. You're proud to have as president. Trump actually leads, has 38% to Biden's 33%. As effective world leader, Trump leads 48% to 36%. And remember, this is after Joe Biden's handling of Ukraine and the crisis in Israel right now, and then has necessary sharpness or stamina. And this is the one that people will focus on. Donald Trump at 53%, Joe Biden, President Biden, at 25%. So again, you look at these personality traits right now, Abby, and you get a sense of how voters are thinking.
Yeah, and that doesn't even get into how voters are thinking about, how President Biden is handling his job. All of this seems to just raise some questions about how the president is faring, especially among his base voters who are going to be critical here going into the next cycle. John, stand by again for us. Laura, over to you.
My panel is back with me, Abby, on this very point. This is really fascinating to think about these traits and how the polling comes out. On the one hand, the administration wants to say, look at the polls. Now, they mean, of course, Kentucky, and they mean, of course, what happened in Ohio and obviously Virginia. But these polls tell a very different story. When you look at what this means, what do you do about it?
Listen, I think the campaign would say there have been 8 polls in the last 3 weeks that have had Joe Biden either tied or ahead of Donald Trump. So let's not get too carried away with 1 or 2 particular polls that show him in a tough spot. What I would say is this.
I want you to finish, but just for the American public, they will look at that and say, but how can he be tied and so close to Donald Trump, given he's the incumbent and all the different indictments?
Because it's a 50-50 race. And I think if you look even at the New York Times poll the other day, Donald Trump was basically at the number he was at on Election Day. So Donald Trump has a ceiling here. Mm-hmm. The question what we're seeing here is Joe Biden is the one who's oscillating up and down. And so the real question for me is getting bad polls is like going to the doctor and getting a bad lipid panel, right? It's like getting a bad set of labs. And
that seems very personal right now.
No, it's like, is it the doctor's fault that I got high blood pressure? No. Like, so when you see those numbers, it does make you have to sit back and take stock as a campaign and say, okay, what are we doing wrong on the measures of perception that are out there? And we've got to go out and do something. This age question is one of the questions. The president is going to have to do things that show people that he can engage, he can handle the combat and the debate. We saw it at the State of the Union a year or so ago. He's going to have to be able to keep doing more of that so people recognize that he is actually up to the job.
One of the things that's surprising to me is the level of the 5-alarm fire that many Democrats are ringing based on a lot of these polls. The New York Times Siena poll, devastating for the president. But all of these things, to their benefit, this is a year out. Y'all have 1 year to turn things around. And the people's disappointment with the economy, hopefully they can work on turning the economy around. His disapproval rating, potentially he can work on this. But all of these things are opportunities for them to grow. The one thing they cannot do anything about is his age. And currently at 81, people have concerns about his age. The most damning part of the crosstab of today's CNN poll was the question of, do you believe that President Biden has the stamina to do the job? 25% of the people polled said he has the stamina to do the job. That is something, he cannot do anything about that. And when they asked about Donald Trump's stamina, 53% of those respondents said that he has the stamina. So that's going to be a difficult hill to overcome because he cannot do anything about his age or stamina.
Well, what do you do about that? I mean, obviously, from the Democrat side, they think about it the way you're describing it in part. But then Republicans also look at this, and is that concerning then? If people have lower favorability for Joe Biden, does that mean that it elevates Donald Trump in a way that many Republicans don't want?
If we're all being honest with each other here, we're both shocked that if you're a Democrat, that Joe Biden is your nominee. And we're shocked as Republicans and concerned that Donald Trump's going to be our nominee, right? That's just the reality. And I would never describe a 78-year-old with talking about their stamina, or an 80-year-old or an 81-year-old, right? I mean, like, we're splitting hairs at this point. We're talking about the most important position in the world that requires the most amount of attention, the most brain cells, the most articulate decision-making. And we're dealing with these two people as our nominees. And one of them is going to be the next president, again. As a Republican, we can do so much better. If we just figured out a way to nominate somebody with a heartbeat and no felonies, they'd be 10 points ahead of Joe Biden today, with all of those metrics that John just showed.
There is a polling about this so-called generic Democrat, and the matchup is pretty significant. But hold on. Thanks, everyone. Abby, I want to go back to you for a second.
CNN can now officially call the governor's race in Mississippi. The Republican there, incumbent Tate Reeves, holding off his Democratic challenger, who just conceded last hour. Let's go now to John Berman over at the Magic Wall. John, we've been watching very closely as these votes have been coming in, particularly in the Democratic parts of the state. They were not enough for the Democratic challenger.
That's right. Not enough. 86% in right now. Tate Reeves, the incumbent Republican, holds a lead of about 42,000 votes, and CNN projects that lead will hold. We've been watching Hines County, the most populous county in the state, with about 80% in. Brandon Presley, the Democrat, has a huge lead there. He leads by almost 60%, almost, 38,000 votes. But even with 20% still remaining, it will not be enough to close that gap. And it's interesting. Brandon Presley, I think, received a lot of national attention in the last few weeks, partially because he's second cousins with Elvis Presley, partially because Democrats thought he ran a very good campaign. But if you look at this race with a candidate Democrats were happy with against a weak Republican incumbent, and I say weak because he's been dealing with some scandals, some welfare scandals and whatnot, it's basically the same result as 4 years ago when Tate Reeves first became governor. He got 52% of the vote then. Jim Hood got 46.7%. And tonight, you're looking at Tate Reeves with 52%, Brandon Presley with 46.6%. So yes, Democrats might be happy with this number in a very Republican state, but fairly inelastic, not able to get above that, a little bit of a ceiling. A significant African-American vote, particularly in this part of the state, the Democratic part of the state, but Brandon Presley wasn't able to run up the numbers there. And one other thing we noticed, there were even counties, again, even with what was seen as a strong Democratic campaign, the Republican Tate Reeves actually flipped Lafayette County home to Oxford, Ole Miss. It's a college county right now. Tate Reeves right now leading with almost 52% of the vote. 4 years ago, the Democrat won that county. So this flipped and is now a Republican county. And if you're Brandon Presley and you wanted to overcome Tate Reeves in a Republican state, that's the kind of county you would have needed to win, and he just couldn't get there. So again, this would have been miraculous for Democrats. They would have looked at this as a miracle if a Democrat was able to win in Mississippi. They didn't get there. They'll be satisfied with this performance, but I think they might feel like, oh, they were so close. Maybe they were onto something, didn't quite get there.
Yeah, I think that's really notable about Oxford there. A place where usually you could count on a few liberals coming out and helping a Democratic candidate out, but not in this case. John Berman, thanks for breaking all of that down for us. Up next, I want to continue this conversation on those numbers Laura was talking about earlier. Does Vice President Kamala Harris do better with voters than her boss, President Biden? More from CNN's special live coverage after this quick break.
Before the break, we talked about the new CNN poll involving a current snapshot for President Biden. And if you dig deep into that poll, you'll see things that, well, they're not much better for his running mate, Vice President Kamala Harris. John Berman's at the Magic Wall with those numbers. John?
Yeah, it doesn't really look much better at the other end of the ticket either. You look at the approval ratings for Vice President Kamala Harris, 39% approve, 61% disapprove, basically where President Biden is as well. And if you look at favorability, also not particularly strong. 32% favorable, 52% unfavorable, very much underwater here. So again, as people look at President Biden, look at his age, look at something that can prop up the ticket, it doesn't seem to be coming from his running mate, Kamala Harris, the vice president, at least not now. Now, I'm sure if you went to the White House and asked them about this tonight, they would say, oh, yeah? Well, look at Kentucky. That would be their answer to this poll right now. And they would say that the Democrat, Andy Beshear, just won in Kentucky. They'll take the votes over than the polls. But there is consistency, not just in the CNN poll, but we see it in the New York Times and CBS polls right now, that this administration is seen as struggling by the American people.
John, I'm so curious about the why in particular. Abby, I mean, digging deeper into those numbers, what is the reason for that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the conundrum I think a lot of Democrats, frankly, are asking themselves about. I want to actually go to this gentleman right here on my right, Ested Herndon, who just wrote a big piece about the vice president.
Yeah.
And I mean, I cannot, overestimate how much of a topic of conversation Vice President Harris is and why those numbers are the way they are. What is the view inside of her office about what they can do about it?
I mean, their view, the top line view from inside the office is that they think she will be the ambassador to Biden to fix these base problems we see in the CNN poll, in the New York Times poll, that she can be a messenger to black communities, to young people on issues like gun control, and specifically on abortion, an issue Biden has been less vocal with when you see him along the trail. They say that in time, her numbers will turn around. But when you look at kind of Vice President Harris as a figure, she's been someone who's been, frankly, unwilling to really lead the party's ideological conversations on many of these issues. I mean, we think back to the kind of criminal justice front in which she came. She's not been the person kind of over the last 4 or 5 years leading that Democratic convo on it. I mean, when I asked her specifically about how she would define herself between the question of progressive or moderate, she told me, how about you define those words and I'll tell you where I fit. That's not someone who's really willing to do that work for you. And I think that's some of what voters are really perceiving is around uncomfort with knowing kind of who she is and what she stands for. I will say that this is not separate from the age issue, but actually a piece of it. When I talk to voters across the country, kind of outside of the insider world of Harris, they really say that if they had more confidence in Biden's number 2, maybe they would see this a little differently. When Biden made that promise to be a bridge to a new generation of Democrats, I feel like a lot of people saw Vice President Harris as the first kind of down payment on that. And for a lot of voters I talked to, that is the real break that's happened with President Biden. There was a sense that he was an emergency option in 2020, but they really didn't kind of fathom that they would be back here in 2024.
Yeah.
I mean, you go back to when he chose the now vice president to be his running mate. They were not friends. If you remember, there was a very famous exchange on the debate stage where she just went right after Joe Biden. But Joe Biden really did paint this picture that he was going to be this bridge, that he was going to help set up Kamala Harris to help break the glass ceiling, something that Hillary Clinton was unable to do back in 2016. But she hasn't seemed to grab the reins. She hasn't seemed to jump right in and to show that she's willing to go out there and get her hands dirty, specifically on some of these issues that have been very, very difficult. Now, I'm not sure if the Biden administration, if Joe Biden's advisors himself, have been very good to her either. I mean, the fact is, she kind of seems like she's left out on an island, and perhaps it's self-imposed in some ways because maybe she doesn't feel as that she's as connected to the administration as she initially thought she would be.
Well, tonight, I mean, look, with abortion once again proving it is the issue, not just for Democratic voters, but for voters writ large in this electorate. This could be an opportunity not just for Vice President Harris, but also, Kristen, I mean, I wonder, is there a path here for Joe Biden, even with the numbers that we're seeing in this poll, to create a policy-focused, stakes-focused presidential campaign that overrides people's concerns about his age and his stamina and focuses their minds on, hey, what's going to happen if there's a Republican in the White House instead of a Democrat?
The problem that Biden is facing is that when you ask voters, for instance, do you think that Biden's policies have helped you or hurt you economically? By a double-digit margin, they say hurt. And then when they ask, do you think Donald Trump's policies helped or hurt you when he was president? By a double-digit margin, they say helped. People are looking back at the Trump presidency through these almost rose-colored glasses. And so while I'd love to think that this 2024 rematch from hell that we're likely to get between Trump and Biden is going to be this very policy-focused sort of rematch, it's not. It's going to be these two men talking about how they each are going to be a complete disaster, completely incapable of holding the office. It's going to be much more personal than policy. That's just the reality of what we're looking at.
It's all rose-colored glasses until Donald Trump is the nominee, and he's out there and in front of people, and it becomes very real.
Right. I think that so many people seem to be operating from a hypothetical version of Donald Trump, a version of Donald Trump that we experienced again and again. And I think from Biden's perspective, he would say, I already beat this guy. And then you remember January 6th? Remember how he has never been able to get over it? Remember the last 3 years of our lives? So I would say from the Biden perspective, they'd be saying, we're probably not going against Nikki Haley. We're probably not going to be running against Ron DeSantis. We're going to be running against Donald Trump, but not even the Donald Trump of 2016, a version that could look forward. We're going to be looking towards a version of Donald Trump that is still fixated on the 2020 election.
But these are the chickens coming home to roost for Democrats, too, because in 2020, when they had that primary that was diverse, that had ideological differences, they really consolidated around the question of short-term electability. Who can beat Donald Trump right now? Joe Biden was not just as old, but was pretty old at the time. And people were making this exact argument around looking to the future. Democratic voters prioritize the short term and have found themselves in this conundrum because of it.
Democratic voters did that even when the sort of political class wanted to go in a different direction. So a really important point there. Everyone stand by for us tonight. There is also some drama on Capitol Hill. 22 Democrats say that a member of their own party crossed a line that no member of Congress should ever cross. We'll explain what happened there next.
You know, as the results poured in tonight, there was a very notable moment happening on Capitol Hill. The House voting to censure Michigan Democrat Rashida Tlaib for remarks that 22 of her own Democratic colleagues say violated decency. She'd posted a video last week where she accused President Biden of supporting genocide, and that included the anti-Semitic rallying cry, which she takes issue with that characterization, of from the river to the sea, which calls for the erasure of the state of Israel. I want to bring in my panel. Ashley Allison, again, she took issue on the floor with that characterization, was very emotional at times about being critical of the government of Israel and that being conflated with anti-Semitism. What do you make of this decision?
She got very emotional on the floor today as the only Palestinian American in the House. Obviously, what happened on October 7th was terrible. And what's happening in Gaza with innocent civilians dying is also terrible. And I think that what we're seeing play out is not just an international issue. It is now coming right to Americans' footsteps and to their doors and to our college campuses. And it's going to play out in the 2024 election. I mean, we've been talking about the election the whole night. I think some of the poll numbers, they were recent poll numbers about Joe Biden with young people, with people of color, have to do with what's happening in Israel and Gaza. No one should ever make anti-Semitic comments, and I often yield to the community that is the target of a statement to say if they find that language derogatory or not. I know Tlaib said she did not mean it in an anti-Semitic way, but 188 Democrats did not support this vote, and it's also going to play out in these House races as Hakeem Jeffries, is hoping to flip the House. So an important night tonight in terms of where our politics stands. I think it is another moment of divisiveness. I am surprised 22 Democrats did support the censure, but here we are, and I think it's going to continue to play out over the course of the next year.
I'm actually surprised 188 members of the House of Representatives have not found her statements and her continued statements absolutely unacceptable and to censure her. That is shocking to me, and I think there's going to be some consequences when they're going for re-election. Look, what she has said and not said, she refuses to point the finger at Hamas and call Hamas the bad guy here and the terrorist, and refusing to accept the fact that Israel has the right to defend themselves when they've been attacked. And her comments and her slogan repeatedly about from the river to the sea, and she tries to claim that is about peaceful coexistence. That is bullcrap. She knows exactly what that means. That is about the complete annihilation of Israel and the murder of innocent Jews. She knows that, but the fact that she continues to put out this false narrative about what's going on and encouraging people to protest and take to the streets on false information, that is absolutely despicable. And I am glad that the members of the House finally stood up to her.
She also spoke about, again, in that emotional speech on the House floor, where she was comforted by some of her colleagues about that Palestinian lives were not expendable, not disposable. And that was one of the issues she also was raising in trying to defend herself on that floor. Your congressman actually brought the resolution. It contrasts to Marjorie Taylor Greene, who tried to bring one that included insurrection-based language. This one proved more successful. Why do you think so?
Yeah, Rich McCormick, I think he was listening to his peers, and to see anything done in a bipartisan manner says something, right? Certainly, as the president of the Senate, of the state Senate in Georgia, very few things were done in a bipartisan way that were controversial. But I think it shows to the complexities of what's going on. This is a war, right? There's just the brutality of what happened in early October, and now the events that continue to play out in the back and forth. I think it's just a sobering reminder of how unprepared we really are, right? We're still trying to pass a budget. We're still trying to get unanimous support for funding for Israel. We're still trying to figure out how to, really position ourselves as a global leader in foreign policy and all of the difficult scenarios that are playing out. I just don't think we're as prepared as we need to be right now. And I think that just brings doubt to the world's mind. This world is a better place when America leads. And I think this is one of these issues where we need to lead.
By the way, we are just days away from another government shutdown on election night in America, everyone. Thank you so much to my panel, both panels, obviously, as well. Election night delivers some pretty big wins for Democrats in places like Kentucky and Ohio and in Virginia. We've got much more on the results and what they will mean just ahead. Well, Abby, Phillip, a busy show tonight. We've had a lot of projections on our watch, and suffice to say, it's been a big night for Democrats.
It has been. Look, the voters have voted. I was texting with a Democrat earlier tonight talking about this dichotomy we're seeing. The polls looking really bad for the president, but the votes turning out differently. And this person said, polls are an expression of frustration and maybe anger with the situation. But when voters go into that ballot box, they are voting on what will actually happen to them in their lives. And that may be what we're seeing out there. And that could have huge implications for this next year, a very consequential presidential year that we're about to get into.
That's why we call it election night in America. You never know what's going to happen. And here we are, and we got a year ahead as well. We want to thank everyone for watching. Our live coverage continues in just a moment.
Hello, welcome to CNN Newsroom. I'm John Vors. We're following two very big stories this hour: Israel's war with Hamas and election night in America. And for Democrats, there's now brief glimmers of distant hope for next year's presidential election, with results now in from off-year statewide election races across the U.S. And it's the power of abortion politics which is becoming increasingly clear. First to Kentucky, where Governor Andy Beshear has been re-elected, making him one of the few Democratic leaders in red or predominantly Republican states. And he made abortion rights a major issue in his campaign.
Tonight, Kentucky made a choice. A choice not to move to the right or to the left, but to move forward for every single family.
In Mississippi, CNN now projects Republican Governor Tate Reeves has won a second term, defeating the second cousin of Elvis Presley, Democrat Brandon Presley, who said, "We came up a little short."
You people in Mississippi on both sides of the aisle, both Republicans, Democrats, and independents, represent the good parts of our state. You represent the good parts of who we are, and I will always be appreciative of that. I know that you're as disappointed tonight as I am. Adlai Stevenson said it hurts too much to laugh and I'm too old to cry, and so I understand what he meant.
Kind of sounds like Elvis. In Virginia, Democrats have taken full control of the state legislatures, hanging on to the Senate and flipping the House of Delegates. Abortion was not directly on the ballot, but is believed to have been a strong factor in those results. In the key swing state of Ohio, voters delivered a strong rebuke to Republicans trying to restrict abortion access. The right to an abortion is now enshrined in the state constitution after a ballot measure was passed. Ohio also voted to legalize recreational marijuana, becoming the 24th state to do so. CNN's Kyung La is in Ohio, has more now on the historic abortion vote.
Abortion rights will be enshrined in Ohio's state constitution. That is the result here in Ohio. According to CNN projections, it is the first Republican state to take such a move. And this was a hard battle fought on both sides of what's known as Issue 1, the effort to enshrine those rights in the state constitution. When CNN called the results of this election, projecting the results, I want you to take a listen to this room. It is a watch party of those who supported Issue 1. You can hear the cheering for yourself. Others, I actually saw a woman burst into tears. It was jubilation as those results were read. Now, the supporters of Issue 1 say that they won by trying to keep this as nonpartisan an issue as possible, urging voters that this was about keeping government out of their lives. The group that was against Issue 1 said in a statement it is heartbroken, but it will regroup and aim to 2024 in battleground states. And in regard to those battleground states, it's sending shockwaves through states like Arizona, where abortion rights advocates there are also trying to get such a measure on that 2024 ballot. A Republican from Arizona, a consultant, tells me tonight that his party should be, quote, scared. Kyung Law, CNN, Columbus, Ohio.
Standing by in San Francisco is Democratic strategist and political scientist Professor Caroline Heldman. And in Sacramento, Mike Madrid, Republican consultant and co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Good to see you both. Thanks for being up. Thanks for staying up late.
Good to see you, John.
So for Democrats who are searching for signs of optimism ahead of next year's presidential race, they now have the re-election of the Democratic governor in deep red Kentucky. There's that ballot measure in Ohio, which enshrined the right to an abortion in the Constitution. And there's also the party prize. Pot was legalized for recreational use in Ohio. Caroline, to you, it all seems kind of thin. Is that the best you got?
Well, I would say that, 85% of Americans support abortion under some circumstances. And when the Supreme Court overturned that basic fundamental right, they gave a gift to Democrats. And we are seeing this gift that is giving and giving. So I think the biggest kind of signal for me is that Glenn Youngkin, the governor in Virginia, actually tried to essentially test a new messaging around this. So instead of, a more compassionate messaging around abortion, so instead of 6 weeks, it would be 15 weeks. Instead of an abortion ban, it would be a restriction. And the world was looking, or the U.S. was certainly looking at him to see whether or not this would be effective. And what we've learned tonight is that even a middle ground with Republicans on abortion is not effective. It doesn't matter where abortion is on the ballot, even in conservative states, it is really a gift to Democratic candidates.
This is very true. So, Mike, to you, before the ballot measure in Ohio, CNN reported abortion rights groups have been on a winning streak. Opponents hope Ohio's Issue 1 offers a reset. Well, it didn't. It wasn't so much a reset as a reaffirmation. So why are Republicans continuing to push what is essentially a very unpopular policy onto the American public, a policy which is so unpopular that it's actually having a negative outcome on other election races across the country?
Well, look, Republicans are stuck in a demographic doom loop. The only group that won in Ohio, or voters that supported this measure 1, were white men without college degrees. That's the largest part of the Republican base. But I do want to put this in context. While Dobbs and the overturning of abortion rights was made possible by the overturning of Roe versus Wade, this trend of college-educated suburban women has been happening for about 4 to 6 years before the Dobbs decision came down. So, yeah, the existential nature of the threat since then has crystallized it. But this voter shift began in 2018. It continued in 2020, and it catalyzed in 2022. And you're seeing now the 4th election cycle in a row where Republicans are essentially becoming a marginal regional party as a result of it, because they're seeing defections in the Republican base. Tonight was not a high turnout youth election. This was about Republicans, particularly Republican women, showing up and voting for a pro-choice position and voting for Democrats. And that's an extremely significant change in the electorate that we haven't seen prior to the 2018 midterms.
But you say it's been going on since 2018. Isn't it time to maybe have a look at what's going wrong?
Yeah, but look, if there's any group that's the least reflective and self-aware in America at this moment in history, it's the Republican Party. They're not going to change precisely because, as I mentioned, they're stuck in this demographic doom loop. The only group that they are speaking to are white males, rural white males with no college degrees, this blue-collar working class. This is Donald Trump's base. This is the MAGA base. And unfortunately, as college-educated voters leave and flee the Republican Party, as moderates leave the Republican Party, all that's left is this small core group that it grows with intensity and focus on its own issues, and that limits its ability to speak beyond its own base. So it's a chicken and egg problem that isn't likely to stop anytime soon. In fact, I think it's going to probably accelerate into this extremism. We saw that with the election of Mike Johnson as the Speaker of the House, and I think that again, Republicans are stuck here in this cycle that is probably going to see the party be reduced to simply a regional factional element as opposed to a national sustainable party.
Well, there is new polling which is out, which is great news for anyone not called Joe Biden. Overall, Donald Trump leads Joe Biden 49% to 45%. Almost every metric is bad for Biden. Voters dislike him more or like him less than Trump. Biden is blamed more than Trump for being part of the country's problem and not the solution. Add to that, Caroline, that this coalition of voters which elected Biden back in 2020 is starting to collapse in many ways. The core voters who got him there in the first place are now deserting the president. So, Caroline, what is Biden doing wrong? Or dare I say, is Trump doing something right?
Well, Trump is certainly doing something right? He's playing into the martyr complex, and it's been very effective for his base. I don't know how effective it's going to be with the general election, given that swing voters don't necessarily like the 91 indictments. But, you know, in that same poll, John, the news for Biden is particularly bad in swing states. And in the 6 swing states that Biden won in 2020, Trump is now leading in 5 of those states, and he's up 10 points in Nevada. I mean, this is a pretty big shift. Certainly the economy is playing a role here, but if you look at polling, folks are concerned about Joe Biden's age. And at the end of the day, though, you have to look at history, you know, that Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama were also very low in the polls a year out. And these are, you know, almost meaningless in the sense that the election is a year away. And both Reagan and Obama handily won re-election. So anything could happen between now and then. But were the election held today, Joe Biden would be in serious trouble.
And Mike, is it just simply a question of Joe Biden's age and perceptions about his ability to be, you know, to run a second term, to run for the entire second term of his presidency?
Well, look, I think that there are certainly problems that are particular to Joe Biden. But let me say, in that same poll, again, a generic Democrat beats Donald Trump in 4 of those 5 swing states that are tested. And also, another question related to Donald Trump was if he's convicted and sentenced to prison, Biden beats him commandingly in every one of those states. So you've got to understand, you're a year out of this election cycle. I'm not, you know, seeing any cause of concern or alarm for Biden at this point, other than the fact that while he is Joe Biden, any incumbent heading into an election usually meets their lowest point, and that's where he's at. I don't think Biden world is panicking, and I don't see any reason for them to either. I think they want to face Donald Trump. Most of the polling, including that Siena poll, would suggest that that's where he stands his best chance.
And very quickly, Caroline, Caroline, we're hearing that, you know, the Kentucky governor who was re-elected basically made a choice not to be seen on the campaign trail with Joe Biden, ran 1 million miles to be away from him, not to be seen. That's okay in Kentucky because it's conservative, but I guess other Democrats who are running for office are making a similar decision. Have they not spoken to Al Gore? Is that a bad choice at the end of the day?
Well, it certainly doesn't help the top of the ticket, but I'm not really sure how long the coattails run anymore, certainly in modern elections. And Joe Biden is not going to be helping any Democrats on the lower part of the ticket heading into 2024.
Okay. Caroline and Mike Madrid, Caroline Hellman, Mike Madrid, thank you both for staying up late and being with us. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Great to see you, John.
You too. Well, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to pass a resolution to censure Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib for her comments criticising the Israeli government and supporting Palestinians amid the Israel-Hamas war. Tlaib is the only Palestinian American in Congress. 4 Republicans voted against the measure, but 22 of Tlaib's fellow Democrats voted in favor of the reprimand. Tlaib posted a video to social media of protesters chanting "From the river to the sea," which the Anti-Defamation League says has long been a rallying cry for those calling for the destruction of Israel.
We will remember in 2024.
Before the censure vote, Tlaib gave an impassioned speech on the House floor defending her remarks. Democrats and Republicans also took to the floor in a heated debate over the censure resolution.
I'm the only Palestinian American serving in Congress, Mr. Chair, and my perspective is needed here now more than ever. I will not be silenced, and I will not let you distort my words.
Her voice matters. She is the only Palestinian American in the Congress, and this is a representative body. Her perspective represents many that her perspective reflects many that she represents, especially when it's not twisted.
I believe that actions have consequences, and I believe that after a long string of anti-Semitic remarks and hate-filled rhetoric, censure is an appropriate consequence for the gentlelady from Michigan.
Gentleman's
never
time
again.
has expired.
Damn it means never again.
To compare a modern democracy with a repressive terrorist state is wrong. But it is also wrong for Congress to take this action at a time when we have serious issues that we face, to take an action and take down the words, to strike the words, to censure a fellow member, no matter how incorrect we believe she may be, is wrong. We lower ourselves when we try to take action against someone else for their words.
Tlaib has previously described the phrase "from the river to the sea" as an aspirational call for freedom, human rights and peaceful coexistence, not death, destruction or hate. Now to Gaza, where Israeli ground forces are now said to be in the heart of the biggest city in the Palestinian territories. According to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, IDF soldiers are now operating inside Gaza City, putting severe pressure on Hamas.
Gaza City is encircled. We are operating inside it. We are increasing pressure on Hamas every hour, every day. We have killed thousands of terrorists, above ground and below ground.
As the Israeli ground offensive continues to advance, the Biden administration once again warning Israel about occupying Gaza. This comes hours after Netanyahu said Israel will have the overall security responsibility in Gaza once the war is over. But Israel's defense minister says there are only two certainties right now about who will run Gaza once Hamas is destroyed.
I can tell you who will not govern. It will not be Hamas, and it will not be Israel. Everything else is a possibility. And I want to say one more thing. At the end of this conflict, there will be no Hamas in Gaza.
A senior aide to the Israeli Prime Minister is denying there are any plans for a long-term occupation of Gaza. Here's Mark Regev speaking to CNN.
We're not talking about any sort of ongoing occupation of the Gaza Strip. Once again, we want the Gazans to rule themselves, and we think there'll be an international effort for that.
Well, now let's go live to London. Journalist Elliot Kin is with us. So, Elliot, I guess the question is, Israel doesn't want to do the job of being the occupiers of Gaza. Egypt doesn't want to do the job of being the occupiers of Gaza. The Palestinian Authority doesn't want the job, and they're certainly not capable of it right now. Who's going to do it?
Well, I don't think anyone really knows exactly what's going to happen the day after this war ends, John. Netanyahu articulated a particular thought in terms of Israel, in his words, having overall security responsibility for the Gaza Strip after this war ends. But I think he was deliberately vague in those words, although there are some far-right ministers in the governing coalition who perhaps would advocate for reoccupying the Gaza Strip, which Israel did occupy on the ground at least from 1967 until 2005. But I don't think Netanyahu or the government as a whole has any intention of doing so. Now, you mentioned the Palestinian Authority. Let's not forget that Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, which administers parts of the Israeli-occupied West Bank, lacks legitimacy there. He's in the 19th year of a 4-year term. And you can hardly see him, metaphorically riding in the slipstream of Israeli tanks into the Gaza Strip to administer the Palestinians there, unless, and he said this himself to Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, when he was over the weekend, unless there is, a major steps towards a two-state solution with East Jerusalem as the capital of an independent Palestinian state. And since that seems fanciful at this point, it's hard to see the Palestinian Authority going into the Gaza Strip, at least in the short term. And that, though, of course, would be the most convenient solution, I suppose, from the Israeli and the US perspective and the perspective of many others in the international community. But it's very hard to see that happening. And, of course, all of this discussion is based on the assumption that Israel will succeed in its objective of destroying Hamas militarily so it can never again visit the horrors that it did on October the 7th on Israel, and so that it's no longer in charge of the Gaza Strip. And then on top of that, let's not forget the 240 hostages that Hamas abducted from Israel and are still languishing inside the Gaza Strip more than a month later. Israel has said there can be no ceasefire until they're freed, and presumably there can be no discussion about what happens after this war ends, or it won't actually end until those hostages are returned. John?
Elliot, we appreciate the update. Thank you. Elliot got in there in London. Well, still to come here on CNN, it's been the month from hell for families of Hamas hostages in Israel, fighting to bring their loved ones safely home, refusing to give up hope. More on that in a moment. Welcome back. It's been a grim month in Israel. In many ways, the nation's still in grief and shock, still mourning lives lost and holding on to hope for those who were taken by Hamas militants on that day, October 7. Israel's response has been swift and devastating. The IDF says they've destroyed 14,000 Hamas targets in the past few weeks. But that success comes with a massive civilian death toll. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the West Bank city of Ramallah, which gets its information from Gaza, which is controlled by Hamas, says more than 10,000 people have been killed since the war began, with women, children and the elderly making up more than 70% of casualties. The UN's Human Rights Commissioner says the situation in Gaza is incredibly disturbing.
It's the 1-month anniversary of this incredible escalation of violence that we have seen. I'm, of course, from a human rights perspective, extremely worried about the situation, about what is happening, and it is really important that a solution is found to end the violence and to get out of this horrible, horrible humanitarian and human rights situation for what's happening in Gaza.
A month is way too soon to see an end to the pain and the heartache for many of the families of the hostages inside Israel. They continue to hold vigils, they keep their loved ones in the spotlight, and try and ensure the Israeli government will not ignore their pleas to bring their captives home. Gustavo Valdez has our report.
A moment of silence marks a month since Hamas brutally killed at least 1,400 people and took an estimated 240 hostages.
Dying slowly, painfully alone in Gaza. No one deserves it.
Adva Adar is talking about her grandmother, 85-year-old Jaffa Adar, who was taken by Hamas. Her cousin Tamir Adar was also taken from a kibbutz near the border with Gaza.
He's a father of 2 young children.
Adar is part of a group of relatives of hostages who, from a plaza in Tel Aviv, are making sure people don't forget.
I need to have hope. I need to have a reason to wake up in the morning and to believe they will come back home.
The site is now a shrine for the hostages, with different artistic representations for those who are not here, sitting next to their relatives, missing the laughter of their children, and making clear that for them, the release of the hostages weighs more than anything else in the world.
She's out there, and they are out there. Every minute is so long.
Leah Yanir says her sister Stella Moran was selling her jewelry at the Nova Festival, from where she was taken. She and her brother Leon say that while their family will always advocate for peace, they want to know that everything is being done to have their sister back.
What I know is that I'm trying to make, that I'm demanding our government to do whatever she can to bring them back, by all means, to take action, to make a negotiation, to do something.
With the world being overwhelmed by the horrific pictures from Gaza,
They are aware that public opinion around the world might not be in their favor because of the rise in civilian death toll.
You know, being here and saying, yeah, we should free the Gazan civilians from Hamas, I know it's true. I know it's true. I believe it.
Iran Margalit has friends who were killed and taken hostage by Hamas and feels that something radical needs to be done to prevent a future attack.
We need to end this Hamas thing. You know, when ISIS went all over Europe, no one stays silent.
Adva Adar wants her grandmother back. Like everyone here, she's not ready to give up.
They have to know that we fought for them.
We let them go once, we will not let them go again.
Gustavo Valdez, CNN, Tel Aviv.
When we come back here on CNN, who can and cannot own a gun will be before the Supreme Court soon. There are indications about how it may rule. This is a major Second Amendment case, all involving domestic violence restraining orders. More on that when we come back. It was off-year election night in America, and now here's an update on some key results. CNN projecting Democrats will take full control of the Virginia legislature, ending Governor Glenn Youngkin's hopes of Republican majorities in both chambers. In deeply conservative Mississippi, CNN projects Republican Governor Tate Reeves has been re-elected, beating Democrat challenger Brandon Presley, second cousin of the late Elvis Presley, the rock star. In another red state, Kentucky, Democrat Governor Andy Beshear has also been re-elected, defeating anti-abortion Republican challenger Daniel Cameron, the state's Attorney General, who'd been endorsed by the former President Donald Trump. And in Ohio, a bellwether state, which Trump carried in both the 2016 and 2020 presidential races, voters approved a measure which will enshrine the right to an abortion in the state's constitution, continuing a winning trend for abortion rights around the country since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade last year. And that's become one of the big takeaways from these elections. Abortion rights matter to many voters, especially in crucial swing states. CNN's Jeff Zeleny explains.
For the next year, as Republicans try to win the Senate, keep their narrow majority in the House, and indeed win back the White House, abortion will be front and center in their strategy. The lessons of Tuesday night's elections in Virginia, in Ohio, and in Kentucky certainly serve as a reminder that abortion is still a very potent issue, and now it has become a motivating factor for Democrats. Of course, since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs decision a little more than a year ago, there are so many examples now, election after election, where Republicans are largely on the losing side of this argument. We're going to see much of this discussion at a Republican presidential debate here in Miami on Wednesday. There has been a difference of viewpoint to some degree about the way forward on abortion. Nikki Haley, for example, the former South Carolina governor, has tried to strike somewhat of a middle ground. Now, Donald Trump, for his part, will not be participating in the debate, but he has tried to not dwell on abortion. He believes it's a losing issue, in the words that he has spoken to some of his advisors. But look for Democrats to try and turn this to their advantage over the next year. In fact, it could be one of their big motivating factors. So there is no doubt, as Republicans try to win control of the Senate, hold their narrow majority in the House, and win back the White House, abortion will be front and center. Jeff Zeleny, CNN, Miami.
Well, for more of these off-year election results, Michael Genovese joins us. He's a political analyst and president of the Global Policy Institute at Loyola Marymount University. Good to see you, Mike. It's been a while.
Great to be here.
Okay, so in Ohio, which overwhelmingly went for Trump in 2020, voters approved this ballot measure to enshrine the abortion right into the Constitution, along with what we're seeing in Kentucky, very conservative Kentucky, the Democrat governor winning his second term. He campaigned against an opponent who was supporting a sweeping ban on abortion. He took the fight to him. He didn't shy away from it. So the issue of abortion rights motivated voters, not just in these elections, but last year's midterms. Any reason to believe it won't be a factor in 2024?
That was a big test for especially for Democrats who are hoping, in fact, counting on abortion having legs, being a sustainable issue that will bring in voters into the polls and vote Democratic. And so the fact that Ohio, basically a Trump state, would so strongly support not just the abortion rights, but also recreational marijuana, those are Democratic issues. And so Ohio really did come through for the Democrats and surprised a lot of people by the margin of victory.
Yeah, before there was Florida, there was always, as Ohio votes, so does the nation. So it is an important state. With regards to the issue of abortion rights, it seems potent enough to help Democrats win, but not potent enough to actually swing an election result on its own. Why is that the case?
I think that as soon as Roe was overturned, the Democrats mobilized, especially the women vote. And the key here is the suburban woman voter. That vote is going to determine the outcome in 2024 and determine a lot of state outcomes. And so that the Democrats could draw suburban women in is an incredibly important sign for them. That is the swing vote. And if the Democrats can control that in the key states that are going to be very contested and very tight, they have a really good chance. And the Democrats are counting on abortion being on the ballot.
Okay, well, here's a little more now from Kentucky's governor-elect, Democrat Andy Beshear. Here he is.
This was our victory. It was a victory that sends a loud, clear message. A message that candidates should run for something and not against someone.
He didn't just run for something, he ran away from the US president, who made multiple attempts to try and be seen with him publicly, tried campaigning with him. He just refused any approach by the White House to be seen with Joe Biden during this campaign. I guess in a conservative state like Kentucky, that's a good move, but that's something which is happening nationwide with Joe Biden and Democrats. So why is that, and how worried should Joe Biden be if that continues?
You're right, John. It's not a surprise that in a conservative red state like Kentucky, a blue governor would try to run away from the incumbent president. Beyond that, and CNN's polling was very, very revealing from today, Joe Biden is in trouble neck and neck against Donald Trump. And so at the very top of the ticket, the Democrats have a candidate who is not very popular, running against another candidate, presumably Donald Trump, who is just about as unpopular. And so the question is, what other issues will come into play? Abortion is the big one right now. But there are all kinds of questions. Young voters, Hispanic voters, African-American voters. Are they going to sit on the fence? Will they not show up? They need to be part of the Biden coalition if he's going to win. And the biggest question, though, and it was not answered fully today, but we got a very good indication, and that is that suburban women are going to go Democratic.
You mentioned the poll numbers, and they are interesting, because right now Donald Trump, facing 92 criminal charges, has a slightly better perception than Joe Biden. Polling shows that 61% say Biden is more part of the country's problems than the solution. 57% say the same thing about Trump. And to explain that away as just sort of bad or ineffective messaging from the Biden campaign or the White House seems kind of just too easy and too simplistic. What else is happening here?
There's always a lag time between what's actually going on the ground and voter perceptions of what's going on. And so voters today in America believe that the economy is in bad shape. And yet all of the indicators are that it's in good shape. And so here's what social science might contribute to that. Political scientists have long said that if you think about a presidential term, think of it as a U shape. You start high in popularity, you go down, and then once you get into campaign mode again, it goes up again. Biden is counting on that. He's counting on that he's number one coming out of the down period. And number two, the economy is going to boost him as it gets closer to election time. We're a year away, so we have a lot of things that can happen.
Michael, thanks so much for being with us. Michael Genovese in Los Angeles. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you, John.
Under U.S. federal law right now, a history of restraining orders for domestic violence prohibits gun ownership. But now that law is being challenged by a man in Texas, and oral arguments are now before the Supreme Court. And it seems the court is leaning in favor of upholding that law. More details now from Jen Sullivan.
Outside the Supreme Court Tuesday, advocates for domestic violence victims demanding protection from abusers. One woman sharing her personal story with the crowd.
The only person the gun was used on was me.
Inside the High Court, the justices hearing roughly 100 minutes of arguments on the Biden administration's appeal of a ruling striking down a federal law that bans people with protective orders against them from owning a gun.
Guns and domestic abuse are a deadly combination.
The challenge to the law was brought by Zaki Rahimi of Texas. He's currently in jail for other gun-related charges. But in 2020, a restraining order was issued against him following a violent altercation with his then-girlfriend. Because of that restraining order, he's banned from owning a gun.
It is possible that it would be unconstitutional to deny people the right to purchase a firearm from a licensed dealer.
Lawyers arguing in support of the law said a woman is 5 times more likely to die from a domestic abuse situation if a gun is involved. In 1994, Congress passed a measure to ensure domestic violence victims could be protected from their abusers under federal laws. Rahimi's lawyer says that violates his Second Amendment rights to bear arms.
Domestic violence was not even an issue, 2 centuries ago.
Yeah. The future of the law now in the hands of the 9 justices. I'm Jen Sullivan reporting.
Congressional Republicans appear no closer to avoiding a government shutdown with just days now until funding runs dry. Republicans emerged from a meeting on Tuesday with apparently no clear strategy. But new House Speaker Mike Johnson says he will release a funding plan in the coming days. A number of ideas have been floated, including a short-term spending bill through January 19, but any measure would have to receive support of the democratically controlled Senate and the democratically controlled White House. Coming up here on CNN, a Lebanese family falls victim to the rising tensions on the Israeli-Lebanese border. Hear from the residents on edge as the border becomes a flashpoint once again. Welcome back. U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq have been targeted again in a series of drone strikes on Monday and Tuesday. U.S. official says the attacks occurred at the Erbil air base in northern Iraq. 1 drone was shot down, 2 others failed to detonate. No casualties or damage have been reported. There's now been at least 40 such attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria in almost 3 weeks by suspected Iranian-backed militias. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah not to enter the war, warning it will be the biggest mistake of their lives. CNN's Ben Wiedemann shows us from the southern Lebanese city of Tyre. Residents near the border are now caught between expecting the worst and trying to live their lives as usual.
A family, a village, is in mourning. Samira Ayub and her 3 granddaughters, Ilyan, 10, Talin, 12, and Rimas, 14, were killed in an Israeli drone strike on their car Sunday afternoon near the border with Israel. Their uncle, Samir, was in the car in front of them. Their mother was screaming, he recalls, "I want my children, where are my children?" as she watched her children burning inside the car. The Israeli military told CNN the vehicle was a, quote, suspected transport for terrorists, adding they're looking into claims there were civilians in the vehicle. Clearly, there were only civilians in the vehicle. Every day, the border area is rocked by incoming and outgoing fire, enough to keep the area on edge. Not enough, yet, to set off a full-blown war. The ancient city of Tyre lies just 20 kilometers, or around 13 miles north of the frontier. Pulling in his nets, Deeb says now is not the time to take risks. Us fishermen aren't going far out to sea, he tells me. We stay close to shore just in case something happens. The normally bustling port, the heart of Tyre, is subdued. Usually this place is full of people, Muhammad, also a fisherman, says. No one is going out. Everyone is staying home. Ilyas's family has been making fishing boats for generations. He lived through all Lebanon's wars and doesn't want to see another one. Everyone is scared, he says. Many people have gone elsewhere. Who wants to stay here and be bombed? Until or unless that happens, the fishermen mend their nets. Life must go on. Ben Wiedemann, CNN, Tyre, South Lebanon.
In a moment, we'll return to Israel, a country at war where there's been a national call-up of volunteers to try and help. More on that in a moment. Welcome back. Republicans in Congress have publicly supported the Israeli government's opposition to a ceasefire or humanitarian pause in the fighting in Gaza. On Tuesday, lawmakers also welcomed some family members of hostages on the one-month anniversary of the Hamas attack.
This is not a time to be talking about ceasefires, pauses. Hamas gave that up on the 7th when they went into villages and slaughtered people, when they attacked music festivals, peaceful music festivals, mowing down people, taking more hostages, including American citizens too.
Hundreds of Palestinians in Gaza have made a dash from the north to the south, many on foot, others taking advantage of a corridor which was opened by the IDF. One of Gaza's primary highways was open for 4 hours. Many people carried little to nothing. Some waved white flags. They held government IDs as they moved along, hoping not to be killed as they reached their destinations.
I would like to go to the south. I don't know how that can happen. Some people are saying they are checking IDs. We want a safe passage because I have little children with me and an old woman who is disabled. We don't know what will happen to us. We ask the governments and the countries to create a safe passage for us to enter. I will try my luck now. I don't know if I will be alive or dead. Will they send me back or arrest me? Only God knows.
They told me I should make the ID clear to be safe. I came from Al-Shati. We walked a lot.
Away from the front lines, volunteers are stepping up for duty in Israel by flipping burgers, chopping onions, or providing free meals, and also a distraction for grief-stricken volunteers who've lost family members to Hamas on that October 7th attack. CNN's Nick Robertson has our report.
A few miles from the front lines, soldiers relax, enjoy free food and the support of their country.
It's like everybody are in war, okay? People of Israel are in war. Everybody wants and needs to contribute.
An army vet turned restaurateur, Rel Nadal stepped up immediately, cooking burgers.
In the second day of war with 1,000 burgers, right now we deliver around 20,000.
And the soldiers, they just show up here and they...
Yes, it's people coming from all over the area.
It feels relaxed, and anywhere else it might be. But so close to war, it's therapy, and not just for the troops.
And to continue to make us a good place to live here.
It's Dudi Shrem's first day volunteering, chopping onions for burgers. His only child, Liam, 28 years old, murdered by Hamas at the music festival.
They wait and they start to shoot. Nobody stay in the car. 3 people. 3 good friends.
And it's not just food that volunteers are stepping up to help out with all across the country. People are doing what they can to support the soldiers and the civilians.
So you're building resiliency here.
You build resiliency, you make sure that our mutual responsibility is in its best.
Ronnie Flammer has thousands of volunteers working for him.
This is the heart of the operation.
This is the heart of the operation. So it's starting to be hard, and that's why we need to, every day, to rebuild the spirit.
In this room, one of dozens like it across the country, volunteers working 18-hour shifts, rescuing families from front lines, finding them places to live.
It helps me keep busy, so the head doesn't get stuck on the war and all the atrocities that happened and keep happening.
Like everyone here, Sean Ettinger, a 21-year-old student, sees the suffering on the other side too.
I do want for it to end, completely.
You're a hero, consider statistics.
Flammer, a third-generation Holocaust survivor, fought in the last incursion, wants to build back stronger.
We seek for peace. So the only thing that we know how to do is to help. It's to rebuild. We are going to bring 1 million people to live on the Gaza border.
For Dudi Shrem, who lost his son Liam, that building back has only just begun.
My son, he liked very much the life. That's what he asked from us. And tell us, continue the life, good life. And we live for him.
Nick Robertson, CNN, Gilad, Israel.
Finally this hour, a call from the Kremlin for humanitarian pauses in Israel's Gaza offensive. Spokesperson Dmitry Peskov expressed concern over the catastrophic humanitarian situation. This is coming from Russia, the same country which has waged an indiscriminate, brutal campaign in Ukraine, targeting women and children, civilian infrastructure, and has broken its promises to hold humanitarian pauses for the past 18 months and longer. Russian President Vladimir Putin has publicly sided with Hamas in its war with Israel, just for the record. Thank you for watching. I'm John Vore. CNN Newsroom continues with my friend and colleague Rosemary Church. See you back here on Friday.
Hello and welcome to all our viewers joining us here in the United States, around the world and streaming on CNN Max. I'm Rosemary Church. Just ahead on CNN Newsroom, a major win for abortion rights advocates in Ohio, and Democrats take full control of the Virginia legislature. All this and more as we cover election results in key states across America. Plus, intensifying the pressure on Hamas. Israeli forces say they have encircled Gaza's largest city and are now inside. More on Israel's Gaza operation in a live report. And G7 foreign ministers pledge to remain united as war rages in Ukraine and in the Middle East.
Live from CNN Center, this is CNN Newsroom with Rosemary Church.
Thanks for joining us. Well, abortion is becoming a winning issue for Democrats as they celebrate key victories in fiercely fought U.S. elections. Kentucky's governor, who campaigned on abortion rights, won re-election Tuesday, overcoming his Trump-backed challenger.
This was our victory. It was a victory that sends a loud, clear message. A message that candidates should run for something and not against someone.
And Ohio has become the latest state to enshrine reproductive rights in its state constitution with the passage of Ballot Measure 1, meaning despite Republicans' best efforts, they won't be able to restrict abortion access before fetal viability, which is around 5 to 6 months of pregnancy. In Virginia, Democrats have won control of the state legislature, maintaining their grip on the Senate and flipping the House of Delegates. Abortion was not directly on the ballot, but is believed to be a strong factor in the results. Republicans did get a win in Mississippi. Governor Tate Reeves has won re-election, defeating Democrat Brandon Presley, the second cousin of rock legend Elvis Presley. Well, more now on that historic abortion vote in Ohio. CNN's Kyung La reports.
Abortion rights will be enshrined in Ohio's state constitution. That is the result here in Ohio. According to CNN projections, it is the first Republican state to take such a move. And this was a hard battle fought on both sides of what's known as Issue 1, the effort to enshrine those rights in the state constitution. When CNN called the results of this election, projecting the results, I want you to take a listen to this room. It is a watch party of those who supported Issue 1. You can hear the cheering for yourself. Others, I actually saw a woman burst into tears. It was jubilation as those results were read. Now, the supporters of Issue 1 say that they won by trying to keep this as nonpartisan an issue as possible, urging voters that this was about keeping government out of their lives. The group that was against Issue 1 said in a statement it is heartbroken, but it will regroup and aim to 2024 in battleground states. And in regard to those battleground states, it's sending shockwaves through states like Arizona, where abortion rights advocates there are also trying to get such a measure on that 2024 ballot. A Republican from Arizona, a consultant, tells me tonight that his party should be, quote, scared. Kyung La, CNN, Columbus, Ohio.
So we are 1 year out from Election Day 2024, and a new CNN poll shows that in a hypothetical rematch, former President Donald Trump has a narrow lead over President Joe Biden. 49% of registered voters picked Trump, with 45% going for Biden. Our poll also shows support for Biden is significantly weaker now among several groups that he previously won by wide margins, including people under 35, women, and Black and Latino voters. And I want to bring in our panel of political commentators. Maria Cardona is a Democratic strategist and Alice Stewart is a Republican strategist. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Rosemary.
So, Alice, I want to start with you. So, despite this bad polling, these bad polling numbers for President Joe Biden in recent days, Tuesday night delivered big wins for Democrats in Kentucky, Virginia and Ohio. So what is the overall message here for Republicans, and what might this signal for the 2024 presidential election?
Well, it's a tremendous win for Democrats in that they are traditionally, obviously, more pro-abortion. And look, what Republicans need to do is realize that as hard as the pro-life community has fought, Rosemary, for overturning Roe v. Wade and putting the choice of abortion in the hands at the state level with elected officials on the state level as opposed to unelected justices, they have to acknowledge the fact that every time abortion has been an issue on the ballot in states, the pro-life community has lost. People have voted to continue to protect their right to have an abortion at the state level. So it's incumbent upon Republicans to recognize we need to change the conversation to more on abortion limits and what is an acceptable level of limiting abortion. Some say 15 weeks, others say more, others say less, but make sure the conversation is about abortion limits and also about what we can do to help the mothers in these situations, the women who are pregnant and need help from whether it is the government or from the private sector. And that's where the conversation needs to go. Look, I think when it comes to Democrats, you look at Virginia, Democrats took over the House and the Senate. And the concern with that, for those who wonder who cares about the state of Virginia and how the House and Senate and House of Delegates and Senate is, traditionally how the Virginia Senate votes in the year before a presidential election, that candidate wins. So that bodes well for President Biden, given that the Virginia Senate is now back in Democratic hands.
Right. And Maria, how should Democrats be reading this? Despite these big wins Tuesday, President Biden, he's in big trouble, isn't it? If recent polls are to be believed, putting him behind Donald Trump on a range of issues, voters can't seem to get past President Biden's age, even though he's only a few years older than Trump. So how do the Democrats plan to deal with this 1 year out from the election?
Well, that's exactly right, Rosemary. It's 1 year out from the election. Polls this far out are not predictive of the outcome, especially when you have such a great night for such a critical issue that has been front and center for Democratic wins since Roe v. Wade was overturned. We saw this happen in 2022, Rosemary, and I'm sure Alice and I were on your program when so many were predicting a red wave right before the 2022 elections, except for me, of course. I knew that abortion and threats to democracy were going to be key going into the 2022 midterms when Democrats also had a great night. And I think that's going to exactly be the case in 2024. And I think the problem with Republicans, and my dear friend Alice just demonstrated it, is that they shouldn't be talking about anything except for letting women make decisions about their own bodies, with their families, with their doctors, and with their faith, if that is something that they adhere to. Period. That's it. No one should put a limit on that except for women. And women are standing up to say, no politician, no government official, no elected leader should be in the room with me while I make a decision that is critical about my family, about how and when I should raise a child. That is one of the most personal, intimate freedoms and rights that we have as Americans. And until Republicans understand that, they are going to continue to lose elections. And so going into 2024, there's no question that Biden has work to do with all of his coalition, but that is exactly what the campaign is focused on. They're rolling up their sleeves. They're having a great night tonight celebrating, but then they're going to roll up their sleeves and focus on communicating this message along with threats to democracy and continuing the job of boosting the economy going into 2024.
Right, and Alice, let's look at this, because all three wins did have some link to abortion, didn't they? We'll look at that big win, though, for abortion advocates, with Ohio residents voting to enshrine reproductive rights in their state's constitution. Let's look again at what this might signal for the 2024 presidential race, because you were saying that they might have to consider compromise, these limits that you mentioned, maybe agree to 15 weeks. But as we heard from Maria, she wants to see it, and most people in America, it's actually quite split. They want to see women having access to abortion. Some would say that they want to have some sort of limit on there. But how does that change the conversation for Republicans? Because you've got some far-right individuals who will not compromise on this.
Right, and that's not a viable path to the future with regard to advocating for the pro-life issue. Look, we have to understand there is a place where we can agree. Nikki Haley made a very great answer in response to this in one of the debates, where she talked about, let's find an issue where we're not demonizing the women, we're not punishing the women or punishing the doctors. We're not making this an issue where a woman who is in this situation is the victim, is the bad person here. And let's look at where can we agree, because the alternative, and Maria, I'm sure my dear friend will push back on this, and some Democrats are fine with abortion up until 9 months and the third trimester abortion. That is absolutely something that should not ever happen. And people say that that's not an option, but it is. If you don't put a limit on it, there is no limit. So it's important to make sure that we discuss where can we agree on this issue, but also we also have to have Republicans make the concession, the necessary concession. There has to be exceptions for the case of rape, incest, and health of the mother, because we cannot steer from that. There are situations where people, whether it is a victim of rape or incest or life or health of the mother, those decisions need to be taken into account when we're talking about legislating such an important decision.
Maria, I know you want to respond to that, but and please do, but I also want you to focus on how the Democrats are planning to harness these results that prove that reproductive rights are big for voters.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I just want to clarify something that my friend Alice said. There is no Democrat that I know today that is advocating for abortion up until the time of delivery. That is just a lie, a misinformation that Republicans are spreading, and it is absolutely not true. And Americans understand that this is a decision that should be in the hands of women and their doctors. And look, the reason why women see any limit, like 15 weeks, as frankly a ban on abortion, is because so many women have different circumstances. One woman is completely different from the circumstance of another woman, and you cannot legislate the uniqueness of women's bodies and the tragic things that might occur later on in their pregnancies. You just can't legislate that. So you have to give women and their doctors the freedom to decide what is best for them, for their lives, for their babies, for their families, period. And again, until Republicans understand that, they're going to keep losing elections. So you know what? Bring it on. Continue to make this a focus of their elections, and Democrats will continue to win. And that's exactly what Democrats are going to do going into 2024, Rosemary, to your question about how we're going to harness this win, the same way that we have up until now. By not making it a Democratic issue, by not making it a progressive issue, by making it an American issue focused on personal freedoms and personal liberties, which Republicans are trying to take away, which Republicans, as an extremist position, are trying to tell women what to do. And women and men and families and Americans across the board, including a good sliver of Republicans, are standing up to say, no.
Maria Cardona, Alice Stewart, many thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Rosemary.
And still to come, the latest on the war between Israel and Hamas as Israeli forces encircle and say they have entered the largest city in the Palestinian territory. Back in just a moment. To Gaza now, where Israeli forces are pressing their military offensive, tightening their grip on the besieged territory and its main city. Israel's defense minister says the IDF is at the heart of Gaza City. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israeli forces are now operating inside it and putting severe pressure on Hamas.
Gaza City is encircled. We are operating inside it. We are increasing pressure on Hamas every hour, every day. We have killed thousands of terrorists, above ground and below ground.
However, the Biden administration is once again warning Israel against occupying Gaza. That came hours after Mr. Netanyahu said that Israel will have the overall security responsibility in the territory once the war ends. But Israel's defense minister says there's only two certainties right now about who will run Gaza once Hamas is wiped out.
I can tell you who will not govern. It will not be Hamas, and it will not be Israel. Everything else is a possibility. And I want to say one more thing. At the end of this conflict, there will be no Hamas in Gaza.
Let's go to journalist Elliot Gotkin, who joins us live from London. Good morning to you, Elliot. So what more are you learning about the military operation in Gaza City or around Gaza City and this warning from the Biden administration to Israel's Prime Minister?
Rosemary, we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu, which has sparked this whole discussion when he was speaking yesterday, talking about how Israel would have, in his words, overall security responsibility for an indefinite period. Now, I think those words were deliberately vague, one, to give Israel maximum flexibility as to what does come the day after this war is over, and also because he probably doesn't really know himself exactly what is going to happen inside the Gaza Strip after this war is over. Now, we heard from the defense minister there saying that it's not going to be Israel governing the Gaza Strip and it's not going to be Hamas governing the Gaza Strip. But assuming that those two things occur, what are the other options? Well, I suppose the most convenient option would be to have the Palestinian Authority, which administers parts of the Israeli-occupied West Bank, to come back into the Gaza Strip, which it lost control of when it was violently wrested from it by Hamas in 2007. But of course, Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, is anyway lacking in legitimacy among the Palestinian people. He's now in his 19th year of a 4-year term, and you can hardly see him riding in the metaphorical slipstream of Israeli tanks into the Gaza Strip to take control, although he did say in conversations with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken over the weekend that that would be a possibility, but only if there were major strides towards an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Right now, of course, that seems pretty fanciful. So what are the other options? Well, maybe some kind of peacekeeping force with the UN or friendly Arab states could be a possibility as well. And I suppose there's also the possibility for perhaps a period of time for Israel to take control. But although there are far-right ministers in the governing coalition who would like nothing more than for Israel to reoccupy the Gaza Strip on the ground as it did from 1967 until 2005. That also seems incredibly likely, and we had that warning from the White House against the possibility of this happening. But I don't think there are really any easy solutions or any obvious solutions that are likely to happen. And I think that the cold reality is that while Israel is focused on this military campaign and entering Gaza City, which it sees as a kind of headquarters for Hamas, and to try to free those 240 hostages that are still being held by militants in the Gaza Strip, that is the focus. And I don't think a huge amount of thought, Rosemary, has really gone into what happens the day after this war is over.
Yeah. Elliot Gotkin, we thank you for that live report from London. Appreciate it. Well, foreign ministers from the G7 member countries are meeting right now in Tokyo. The group is discussing several issues, including reiterating their support for Ukraine amid Russian aggression and condemning North Korea's repeated ballistic missile launches and arms transfers to Moscow. But they're still working towards joint language to address the war between Israel and Hamas. CNN's Mark Stewart joins me now live from Beijing with more on this. So, Mark, what is expected to come out of this G7 meeting of foreign ministers in the end? Will they be able to pin down language they're all happy with?
Hi there, Rosemary. That is the big challenge, to create some kind of statement, a unified voice, especially when it comes to the Israel-Hamas war. These are economic giants, and their words certainly carry some weight. And the wording of it is really what could cause some trickiness, some difficulty in all of this. For example, some G7 nations are very much in favor of using the phrase cease fire, but that's not something the United States, especially Secretary of State Antony Blinken, is so keen on. He has often suggested he prefers the phrase humanitarian pause as to what should happen next in this conflict. So that's going to certainly be a point of conversation. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, expect for him to take the lead in many regards in this conversation about this statement. He just arrived in Japan from the Middle East, where he had meetings in Israel, Iraq, Turkey, as well as the West Bank. So he has some fresh eyes, some fresh perspective on all of this. So expect for him to take some kind of role in negotiating all of it. Despite the difficulty with Israel and Hamas, we are seeing some unity, though, on other fronts among the G7 nations, including the war in Ukraine. Once again, G7 nations have expressed their support for Ukraine, in fact, going as far as saying that it is very necessary to have this unified voice to advance the process of a peace formula. So on that point, they are very much lockstep. Also, we are hearing condemnation from the G7 again toward North Korea and its continued ballistic missile testing, as well as allegations of arms transfers to Russia. Rosemary, it is still afternoon time in Tokyo, so perhaps we will get some indication as to where the G7 is heading with Israel and Hamas in the hours ahead.
All right, we will talk next hour. Mark Stewart joining us live from Beijing. Many thanks. A U.S. state that leans Republican has just passed two controversial ballot measures. We will discuss the votes to protect abortion rights and legalize recreational marijuana. Back with that and more in just a moment. Results from the latest U.S. elections are sinking in, and it is becoming clear abortion rights are popular, no matter when or where they're on the ballot. And Democrats are reaping the rewards. They're celebrating key wins in Virginia, where they swept the legislature, hanging onto the Senate and taking control of the House of Delegates. That's after the Virginia governor vowed to outlaw abortion after 15 weeks, in most cases, had Republicans won full control. In Ohio, voters have chosen to enshrine abortion rights in their state constitution. And in deeply Republican Kentucky, Democratic Governor Andy Beshear won re-election after campaigning on reproductive rights. So let's go now to CNN senior political analyst Ron Brownstein in Los Angeles. He's also senior editor of The Atlantic. Always good to have you with us.
Hi, Rosemary.
So Democrats are getting mixed messages here from voters, aren't they? On one hand, celebrating these big wins in Kentucky, Virginia and Ohio. On the other, trying to make sense of recent troubling poll numbers for President Joe Biden, putting him behind Donald Trump in a hypothetical rematch. What do you make of all this, and what might it reveal about voting intentions come 2024?
Well, first, as I say in The Atlantic tomorrow morning, a preview tonight, Democrats continue to perform better at the polls than in the polls, right? I mean, this continues a pattern where they have outperformed their 2020 results in a whole series of special elections through the year and a 2022 midterm, when Republicans gained much less than they expected and much less than the party out of power in the White House typically has done when people are dissatisfied with the president. I think you can square the circle. And the way I look at this is that the polls are telling us one thing that is real. and that is that Americans are dissatisfied with President Biden's leadership. They are unhappy about the economy, and they question whether he has the the physical and intellectual capacity to do the job for another 4 years. But what these elections are telling us is that even when all of those doubts are present, when you have an actual campaign that focuses voter attention on whether they want to entrust Republicans with power, they may choose to vote for Democrats anyway, despite all those doubts about Biden, and that instinct is especially powerful in the large metro areas, the urban centers, and inner suburbs that were the consistent thread in the results tonight, whether it was in Kentucky, Virginia, Ohio, or Pennsylvania, with the state Supreme Court election. In all of those cases, Democrats dominated in the population centers where the Trump-era Republican cultural agenda is pretty consistently unpopular.
And Ron, on the other side of the political divide, what is the message for Republicans here in the wake of these big wins for Democrats Tuesday night, including, of course, Ohio residents voting to enshrine abortion rights in their state's constitution?
Well, look, I mean, Republicans have lots of reason to be optimistic. As I said, the doubts about Biden are real. You can't just kind of wave them away from these election results. But I think the message for Republicans is that the biggest problem they have had in the last few elections, really since Trump became the dominant figure in the party, is still there, which is that in these well-educated and diverse, populous and mostly prosperous inner suburbs, there are too many voters who question whether Democrats are delivering for their interests, who still won't vote for Republicans because they consider them a threat to their rights and their values and to democracy itself. And it does suggest that it is premature to assume that all of those doubts about Donald Trump and the kind of the Trump era GOP cultural agenda have dissipated in those places. I think right now the polls are telling us that we are seeing a lot of dissatisfaction with Biden. That is primarily what is being registered in the polls. What these election results are telling us is that when you have campaigns that can focus voters on the choice and ask them to also consider, whatever their doubts about Democrats, whether they want Trump-style Republicans in position to implement their agenda on abortion, on book bans, on voting, and other issues, you can get a very different result in a broad array of states, but consistently in those big suburban and urban population centers.
Ron Brownstein, always a pleasure to get your political analysis. Many thanks.
Thanks for having me.
And still to come, bouncing back in the face of climate change, parts of the Great Barrier Reef are now spawning new coral, giving hope to scientists who are trying to protect it. Back with that in just a moment. Climate scientists have released new data showing 2023 is shaping up to be the hottest year on record. The European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service reports that October was the warmest October on record globally, with an average surface air temperature of 0.85 degrees Celsius above the average for the previous 3 decades. And this graph shows the 2023 monthly temperatures in bright red. Despite a slight dip in October, each month since June has set a new global temperature record. And sea surface temperatures are also setting record highs this year, which corresponds with 6 consecutive months that Antarctic sea ice has remained at record low levels. Well, warming oceans are considered the greatest threat to the world's coral reefs. But parts of Australia's Great Barrier Reef are showing some resiliency, with coral now starting to regenerate. Scientists are welcoming the news as they lobby the Australian government to do more to protect this natural wonder. CNN's Ivan Watson has our report.
Nighttime on Australia's Great Barrier Reef. The sea explodes in an otherworldly spectacle. This is coral spawning. One of the world's greatest natural wonders is made up of billions of living creatures that reproduce like this each year. And this season has scientists excited.
We were out diving until about 11 o'clock last night looking at the coral spawning, and we were lucky enough to see some of the species spawning. Not all of them, but we saw the soft corals, and they filled up the water with bundles of eggs and sperm, which was really spectacular.
The spectacular sight is a type of synchronized breeding. Coral polyps release millions of sperm and egg bundles into the water all at once. When two bundles from the same species collide, new life is born. It's a display of nature's resilience, repeated around this time of year across the Great Barrier Reef's nearly 133,000 square miles. But while some parts of the reef remain healthy, other parts are bleaching and dying, killed by temperature rise due to global warming.
They're a little bit like Goldilocks. They need the temperature and other conditions to be just right. And if they go outside of those boundaries, then we have this phenomenon called coral bleaching.
Scientists in Australia are studying ways to boost the chances for successful reproduction. Right now, it is nature that holds the key to the reef's survival.
This process of sexual reproduction, which is what's going on, is also one of the ways in which you get natural adaptation to changing conditions. Now, one of the big challenges with climate change is it's happening so fast that it may mean that the genetic variability isn't able to keep up with it. But nonetheless, it's really important that the process is happening.
The coral spawning at Moore Reef near the city of Cairns gives hope that this wonder of the world might still be rescued. The speed at which we transition to green energy and the degree to which our planet warms will determine how much of the Great Barrier Reef can be saved. Ivan Watson, CNN.
Extraordinary images there, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Rosemary Church. For our international viewers, World Sport is coming up next, and for our viewers here in the United States and in Canada, I'll be back with more CNN Newsroom in just a moment. Please stay with us. A warm welcome back to our viewers in North America. I'm Rosemary Church. Well, more than a year after the US Supreme Court overturned the law that legalized abortion, voters in Ohio have handed a victory to reproductive rights advocates. CNN projects Ohio will approve a measure that enshrines abortion rights into its state constitution. Abortion advocates are working to get similar measures on the 2024 ballot in other states, some of which have restricted access to abortion, including Arizona and Florida. And that's become one of the big takeaways from Tuesday's elections. Abortion rights matter to many voters in crucial swing states. CNN's Jeff Zeleny explains.
For the next year, as Republicans try to win the Senate, keep their narrow majority in the House, and indeed win back the White House, abortion will be front and center in their strategy. The lessons of Tuesday night's elections in Virginia, in Ohio, and in Kentucky certainly serve as a reminder that abortion is still a very potent issue, and now it has become a motivating factor for Democrats. Of course, since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs decision a little more than a year ago, there are so many examples now, election after election, where Republicans are largely on the losing side of this argument. We're going to see much of this discussion at a Republican presidential debate here in Miami on Wednesday. There has been a difference of viewpoint to some degree about the way forward on abortion. Nikki Haley, for example, the former South Carolina governor, has tried to strike somewhat of a middle ground. Now, Donald Trump, for his part, will not be participating in the debate, but he has tried to not dwell on abortion. He believes it's a losing issue in the words that he has spoken to some of his advisors. But look for Democrats to try and turn this to their advantage over the next year. In fact, it could be one of their big motivating factors. So there is no doubt, as Republicans try to win control of the Senate, hold their narrow majority in the House, and win back the White House, abortion will be front and center. Jeff Zeleny, CNN, Miami.
Joining me now is Lindy Lee, a political strategist and women's co-chair of the Democratic National Committee. Appreciate you being with us.
Rosemary, thank you so much for having me.
So we have been watching key votes across America that could potentially signal the direction of the 2024 presidential race. And Ohio has been one of the most closely watched, where residents just voted to protect abortion rights by enshrining them in the state constitution. What's your reaction to that result, and how significant is this, do you think?
This is so significant, and it wasn't just a victory, this was a resounding victory, and Republicans did everything they could to prevent this from happening. Over the summer, they put a vote before the people to raise the threshold of acceptance to 60%, which would have made it much harder to defeat this, but the people batted it down, just like they batted it down today. Issue 1 enshrines the right to abortion, not only abortion, though, but to contraception, to all sorts of reproductive decisions. And it keeps these very vital and very important intimate decisions between a woman and her doctor, where it should be. And it's incredible because we also have to keep in mind that this is the very state that forced a 10-year-old rape victim to travel to Indiana to get abortion care. She was denied care in her own home state. And then she was attacked by Representative Jim Jordan, who denied her story and then refused to apologize once he was exposed. And then Representative Jean Schmidt of Ohio also called her rape an opportunity. So today is a victory not just for women, for everyone who believes in a woman and a girl's right to have control over their own bodies.
And Lindy, in the last couple of days, we have seen some pretty tough polling numbers for President Joe Biden, putting him behind Donald Trump on a range of issues. However, reproductive rights have, of course, become a central issue for President Biden and his party. But will Democratic voters be fired up enough about this controversial issue, do you think, to turn out in sufficient numbers come November 2024, given Republicans, they're also motivated by this issue?
Rosemary, that's an excellent question, but I want to remind everyone today that today is a reminder that women have not forgotten about Dobbs. We haven't forgotten that they took away our reproductive rights. They took away our bodily autonomy, and it's been more than a year, but the pain is still there, and it's going to propel us to victory in 2024. And despite all the naysayers, despite all the doubts, this rests at the heart, the core of what it means to be a woman. We're not going to soon relinquish the importance of that. This is something that lights a fire under the butts of women, young people, allies, everybody. And this isn't just about women's rights, but it's also about having, it's also about gay marriage. It's about privacy. It's about making decisions. It's about birth control. It opens the floodgates to everything. So this impacts every facet of American life.
And Lindy, ever since the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, Republicans have been pushing through restrictive anti-abortion legislation in some red states. But Democrats have won in all 6 states that put abortion on the ballot, and now, of course, Ohio can be added to that list. So how might these wins change the trajectory of the fight for reproductive rights at the state level?
I think this is a model that we can replicate in many different states. We saw this in Kansas, where pro-forced birth interests spent $3 million and more trying to ban abortion. They lost. We saw this in Ohio just today. They lost. So we're going to keep doing this again. And one should also be aware that Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, promised to pass an abortion ban if he were able to win a trifecta in Virginia. Tonight, he was denied that trifecta. And so he will not be able to implement the abortion ban that he promised. Governor of Kentucky, Governor Andy Beshear, who is in a ruby red state, promised to keep abortion legal, which demonstrates that wherever Democrats run on abortion, they win. This is about life. If you cannot control your body, nothing else matters. This rests at the core of humanity. So this demonstrates that reproductive rights will continue to be a winning issue everywhere. And this is the very issue that Biden and Democrats need to propel young people who are otherwise unsure to the polls. This is no joke. We should vote like our life depends on it, because in this case, it literally does.
A powerful message. Lindy Lee joining us there and sharing her perspective on this issue and the outcome in Ohio. Many thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
The U.S. House of Representatives voted to pass a resolution to censure Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib for her comments criticizing the Israeli government and supporting Palestinians amid the Israel-Hamas war. Tlaib is the only Palestinian American in Congress. CNN's Manu Raju has more now from Washington.
On Tuesday night, a bipartisan House majority voted to censure Rashida Tlaib, the Palestinian-American congresswoman, someone who is a sharp critic of Israel and especially its conduct in this war. She had recently used a remark that has been widely condemned and used by Hamas as a rallying cry calling for the destruction of the Jewish state from the river to the sea. That phrase she contended was not meant as a more peaceful phrase, but that is not how it's been interpreted here, especially in light of some of her recent criticism of Israel and criticism that has come from even members of her own party. In fact, a bipartisan majority voted to censure her. 22 Democrats voted in favor of this resolution. It was 234 to 188. There were 4 Republicans who voted against it. Essentially, there's a public reprimand of Rashida Tlaib. Censures typically were rarely used in the past. They've become increasingly used in recent years. But in the aftermath of this vote, Democrats were sharply divided on this question.
When you're uttering phrases like from the river to the sea, you're not simply advocating for the creation of a Palestinian state, you're advocating for the destruction of Israel as a Jewish state. And that crosses a line that no member of Congress should ever cross. It's hate speech, and Congress has a right to condemn it.
It is outrageous. I am embarrassed for those Democrats who voted to censure their own colleague, who voted against free speech. It is an embarrassment.
Now, Tlaib took to the floor earlier in the day and said that she was speaking as a Palestinian American. She was criticizing her critics for silencing her, or at least attempting to silence her, said that she would not be silent in a very emotional speech on the House floor. However, she did not apologize for any of her past remarks, and in talking to a number of Democrats and Republicans, they wanted to hear more contrition from some of her remarks, which is one reason why she was publicly reprimanded on Tuesday night. Manu Raju, CNN, Capitol Hill.
U.S. congressional Republicans appear no closer to avoiding a government shutdown with just days until funding runs out. House Republicans emerged from a meeting on Tuesday with apparently no clear strategy, but the new House Speaker, Mike Johnson, says he will release a funding plan in the coming days. Several ideas have been floated, including a short-term spending bill through January 19, but any measure would have to get the support of the democratically controlled Senate and the White House. Affordable housing is moving further out of the reach for many Americans due to high mortgage rates and rising home prices. This is now the least affordable housing market in almost 40 years, according to research from the Intercontinental Exchange. The study says it now takes nearly 41% of the average monthly income to cover the principal and interest payments of a median-priced house. To put that in context, for the past 3 decades, it took less than 25% of the average monthly income to make mortgage payments. I want to thank you for your company this hour. I'm Rosemary Church. I'll be back with more CNN Newsroom in just a moment. Do stay with us.